Inside a cave, only screams could be heard, shouting that a magical beast was there. Someone was begging for help while screaming for everyone to run. A young man was giving it his all just to stay alive. His name is Ye Qing. He is a level 0 collector. He stares at the magical beast in front of him and thinks he can't even scratch the demon's head. Despite all his attacks and efforts, he dealt a total of 0 damage to the spirit wolf. He thinks about how he survives by picking up the trash left behind by hunters, as a level 0 is considered by society to be nothing more than a burden, a useless person, and trash. A monster prepares to attack again, and even knowing that his chances are basically 0, he doesn't flinch and gives his all, aiming for its head. But it's no use. His wooden shield is easily shattered and the monster lands a hit. As he's attacked, he thinks to himself that he's truly living like trash. On the brink of death, he looks at the monster and thinks that this isn't right. He screams with all his might that he refuses to die like garbage. He attacks once more and suddenly a message appears. You dealt a critical hit to the spirit wolf. 1 damage dealt. In City G, there is a rank C abyssal portal. A man begins to approach the portal and another comes running. Ye runs through the portal with something in his hand, while a monster chases after him. A hunter attacks the monster and defends him, saying the collector is too slow. The protagonist is a veteran collector and works every day recycling the trash left behind by hunters who fight monsters, because the Abyss supervisors don't want those resources to fall into the hands of ordinary people. After all, those crystals are rank C and worth over 50,000 yuan. Suddenly, someone shows up and steps on a box, calling the protagonist a brat. The hunter says they will inspect the dungeon resources one by one, and warns that if Ye tries to be clever and hide a crystal, he'll face a hefty fine and might even be arrested. The protagonist asks his boss to calm down, saying he's been doing this for a long time and knows all the rules. The collector's job is usually done by those at level 0. If the combat team can't handle the monsters, level 0 lives are in immediate danger. And it's not an exaggeration to say the job is worth a life. The pay for returning from a dungeon is 300 yuan. Each collector gets 1,000th of the value of the trash collected, around 600 yuan. But since the agency takes 30%, they're left with about 540 yuan. The protagonist sighs, saying his debt is over 670,000 yuan, so he needs to work much more. Suddenly, one of the collectors calls Ye and says there's a big job with a 3 1,000ths commission. He asks if Ye wants it. The protagonist is a bit surprised, asking if it's really 3,000ths, as that's very high. His partner says Ye always seems to need money, so if he wants in, he just needs to apply to the group. Ye doesn't waste time and stands up, saying he'll join and will apply right away. On the bus, people were asking if the public mall in Shenfeng is that Abyss Republic they've been hearing about in the news. They say it's rank A. That's why the rewards are so high. They heard that several groups were wiped out. No one made it out alive. One of the workers asks if it's another subcontract, and they say it probably is. Besides cleanup, there are other important missions too, like retrieving the gear of the eliminated teams. Some workers get a bit irritated, saying those businessmen are really cunning. They question who allowed capitalists to commercially manage the abysses. The protagonist just listens in silence, staring out the window. The evolution of business. 10 years ago, the abyssal portal descended from the void, bringing the abyssal beasts with it. Only those who could level up gained special abilities to defeat these beasts. As the demonic beasts were killed, people discovered that the abyss held not only energy products like magic crystals, but also weapons and many mysterious items. When a new world was discovered, humanity went into a frenzy and began exploring the abyss. Many traditional companies went bankrupt and public funds were redirected to support this new market. Ye tried to find work in every possible way. However, he always heard that no level 0 people were accepted. He went to the hospital and the doctor shouted at him, saying the hospital wasn't a charity, and if he didn't pay up soon, he could take his mother and leave. In despair, unable to afford his mother's treatment, he begged the doctor for forgiveness and asked for just a few more days to get the money. Inside his house, the landlord starts banging on the door, shouting for the protagonist to open up because he's already 2 months behind on rent. Everywhere he went, it was always the same thing. They told him to disappear, that he wasn't needed, that he was just trash and should vanish. This drove him into complete despair as he needed money to pay for housing and, most importantly, his mother's treatment. The job market is unprecedentedly bleak for level 0 players who can't level up. Basically, they're already considered useless by society. Suddenly, in the midst of all this desperation, someone shows up and offers him a loan card asking if he needs money. With no other option, the protagonist looks at the person and takes the card. The person says he needs to pawn the most valuable things he has, which in this case are his organs. Back in the present, he sighs. One of the workers looks at the protagonist and says he heard that he borrowed 1 million from a loan shark and lost it all in the stock market, and if he doesn't repay what he owes, he's going to lose a kidney. And on top of that, he still has a little sister who depends on him. Not to mention the hospital bills are extremely expensive. They say it looks like that kid just needs to die already since there's no way he can pay off that debt. And even if he stays alive, he'll live the rest of his life as nothing but trash. Finally, the bus arrives at the location and the combat group was already waiting. One of the fighters says all the collectors are too slow, and they get off the bus already apologizing. Another fighter tells them to hurry up and emphasizes that it's not his fault if anyone dies. Everyone starts climbing and heading toward the portal. Ye also gets off the bus and looks at the portal, thinking that this time he'll work hard to earn money and make it out alive. He steps through the portal and enters the underground city, the Dungeon Republic in Shenfeng, a rank B abyss. He looks around, thinking it's his first time entering a rank B abyss. Suddenly, the hunters hear a noise and some magical beasts appear ahead of them. A shield bearer shouts, calling his partner and saying that monsters showed up as soon as they entered. A magic user steps forward and says this is too easy since they're just low-level spirit wolves. He starts summoning flames around him as the wolves attack. He fires a fireball, causing a large explosion and pushing the other wolves away. The shield bearer tells everyone not to let their guard down as demonic beasts can ambush them in any dark corner. Another team member asks what their destination is. The shield bearer points upward, saying it's the 5th floor. A hooded member says it might just be an illusion. However, the first floor of that dungeon seems 5 times larger and 3 times taller. The guy with glasses says that's abyssification, a replica created based on the real world but whose internal structure has been completely mutated. He asks where the bodies of the groups that came before them are, as there's no trace at all. He tells the collectors to try and find the bodies and not just wander behind, stressing that no matter where level 0 goes, their only use is being trash. The protagonist starts walking through the place, a bit distracted, and the magic user was crouching right in front of him, tying his shoes. Suddenly, Ye doesn't notice and trips over him, falling face first to the ground. The magic user gets a little irritated and yells that he should watch where he's going. Ye, scared, apologizes. However, the magic user grabs him by the shirt and slams him against the wall, saying hitting trash disgusts him and that it scared him because he thought a monster was attacking. The shield bearer tells Lao Chen to leave the collector alone because they have a mission to accomplish. Lao Chen looks at the protagonist angrily and throws him to the ground, saying if he knows he's trash, he should stay away. Ye, still on the ground, thinks that guy is just a jerk who looks down on others. Lao Chen keeps ranting and asks the collectors if this is what they call a professional team. They start walking, and the protagonist thinks they're just burdens to society, useless trash. Those are the collective terms society uses for level zeros. However, they have no idea that the protagonist's experience is at 99 out of 100, and he's about to level up. He starts walking alone through the dungeon. Suddenly, he and another collector come across a demonic beast. The collector screams that it's a demonic beast and starts running, telling everyone to get away. Ye starts getting a little worried, saying the hunters let a spirit wolf escape. That is a critically injured spirit wolf. The protagonist looks behind him and sees a level 1 wooden shield and a level 1 stick. The wolf tries to attack him. Ye thinks that monster is nearly dead, but his group ran away. He runs and tries to grab the shield but takes a direct hit. Still, he doesn't back down and says this is exactly the chance he's been waiting for. He lands on his feet, holding the shield and the stick in his hands. He charges at the monster without hesitation. The wolf is alone. He manages to land a hit on the monster's head, saying it should just die. However, the damage dealt is 0. The demonic beast only gets angrier, and the other collectors, who were a bit farther back, say that Ye is extremely dumb. They point out that the protagonist didn't start in this field yesterday, so he should know that only hunters can deal damage to those demonic creatures. While fighting the wolf, he thinks that he already knows that. His stats are Level 0, Strength 1, Agility 1, Intelligence 1, Willpower 1, Constitution 1, Luck 1. He drops his bag and tries to run from the wolf, thinking that with such weak attributes, he can't even scratch a weak monster. He turns around, frustrated, thinking that this is something he knows better than anyone. And it's precisely because he understands this so well that he has to go even harder. He dodges one of the attacks and charges again. Somewhere else, Lao Chen starts laughing, saying that when level zeros see a nearly dead beast, they'll tremble and piss their pants. The shield bearer says they could line their pockets just by killing a few monsters, but those pieces of trash can't do a thing to a demonic beast. No wonder they're worse than garbage. He says they should keep the more valuable items and leave the rest to the collectors, telling them to clean up what's left. Another hooded member warns the boss that it looks like another beast escaped around there. Suddenly, screams are heard, saying a demonic beast appeared, and they should run. The hunters start laughing, saying it's exactly as the boss predicted. Lao Chen, still annoyed, says that the purple item has already been claimed by him and warns everyone to stay away from it. Meanwhile, deeper in the dungeon, noises are heard from all directions. Ye is being attacked by the demonic wolf and, badly injured, begins to panic. However, he gathers all his strength and yells that he refuses to die like trash. He manages to stab the monster with his stick, landing a critical hit and dealing 1 point of damage. With that, he defeats the wolf, which collapses in front of him. On his knees, he starts panting and, even in excruciating pain, begins to laugh, shouting and celebrating that he managed to take down at least one. Suddenly, he hears someone approaching. Lao Chen starts mocking him, saying the loner managed to defeat a low-level wolf. He grabs Ye by the shirt again and yells, asking if he's playing hero and whether he thinks he's immortal. Lao Chen keeps yelling, saying they didn't spend money just to drag the corpse of a worthless idiot like him. However, despite hearing all of this, the protagonist smiles. A hunter's career doesn't follow just one path. When you reach level 1, even a level 0 can change classes and gain access to a hidden class more easily. But for that, you need to find ways to gain experience and level up. Yet, for a level 0 who can't deal damage to demonic beasts, that's like climbing a slippery mountain barefoot. Even so, Ye spent years risking his life, seeking a critical hit to gain experience, accumulating little by little, rising slowly. But he never gave up until reaching 99%. A message appears. Repeated kills. You dealt 1 damage to the spirit wolf. You gained 1 experience point. With that, he finally reaches 100%. Completely injured but happy, he says, "This is the only way to gain experience. The conditions have been met." The system shows that his experience points went from 99 to 100, and that the requirements for leveling up have been fulfilled. Lao Chen is shocked and shouts that someone like that actually managed to change class. The system congratulates him, saying he finally reached level 1. An aura begins to envelop his body. In the end, he obtains the class Abyss Collector, and his max level is 1. Lao Chen looks at that and bursts out laughing. He asks what kind of joke of a class change that is. A garbage collector is still a garbage collector, and the max level is 1. He taps Ye's shoulder, apologizing because he just can't stop laughing. He says this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, and even so, the protagonist managed to get a class that literally means trash. He keeps laughing and says it's perfect for him. Suddenly, Lao Chen stops laughing and gets serious, staring directly at Ye, saying all the other collectors are gone, and that's why Ye will finish the cleanup alone. He turns and starts walking away, mocking and telling the other fighters that they won't believe what just happened. The protagonist looks at his injured hand and asks if collectors really are weak. He thinks that if the max level is 1, then he won't be able to use attributes to level up. He looks at the wolf's corpse and wonders what a collector's ability is. Suddenly, his eyes start to glow and the wolf's corpse begins to emit a strange energy. The system says, "Recyclable trash found. Low-level spirit wolf corpse." Ye is a bit surprised to see this system screen, so he decides to say yes. Suddenly, his eyes begin to glow purple and several hands appear out of nowhere. A powerful energy and intense pressure take over the area. He looks back and asks if this is a collector's ability. The hands go to the wolf's body and begin pulling it in. A message appears saying the trash is being disintegrated until the disintegration is complete. Ye asks if that's all and if it's over already. Suddenly, a hand reappears and informs him that he gained spiritual boost, emphasizing that he received 3 attribute points. The protagonist asks if he can get skills and attribute points from corpses. Curious, he opens his attribute panel. The hand says he needs 3 agility points to use it, which surprises him since it's only 3 points. He goes to the panel and says that if that's all it takes, then he'll put everything into agility, raising it to 3. The system informs him that he met the conditions to use the Spirit Wolf's ability and asks if he wants to activate it. Without hesitation, he says yes. Suddenly, he starts feeling something strange in his body. When he opens his eyes, he's a bit confused because he didn't feel any result. Someone yells at him, saying he needs to go clean up that mess, and he yells back that he's going. Afraid of getting scolded, he starts running. But as he steps on the ground, he notices something different. His speed is extremely higher. Not used to it, he trips over a root and falls to the ground, asking if it was the ability that did that. The system screen appears again, informing him that the spiritual boost is on cooldown. He gets up, takes a deep breath, and looks ahead. But when he sees it all, he's surprised. There are several wolf corpses there. With his new vision and collector ability, he can see that all those bodies are recyclable. Ye wonders if he can take attributes and recycle abilities from beasts, because that's the only ability of an abyss collector. He starts using his ability again, saying that maybe it's his only ability, but it's extremely powerful. While his skill devours all those corpses, messages keep appearing saying he gained 4 attribute points, 3 more attribute points, and so on. The protagonist says that when he first touched the spirit wolf's corpse, he gained the spiritual boost ability. One of the hands reaches him and delivers an energy orb, saying he received 1 attribute point. He's surprised and wonders if that really is an attribute point. He points out that apparently devouring the same type of corpse doesn't grant more abilities. Additionally, the reward for recycling bodies of the same species gradually decreases. He asks all those hands if he needs to recycle new corpses to gain new abilities, and they respond yes. He's happy, saying that this class really didn't disappoint him. He opens the attribute panel again and is shocked to see he already has 111 unassigned points. He stares at the panel and wonders what he should raise since points are no longer a problem. Ye starts smiling and says it's best to distribute the points evenly, so he begins raising all his attributes equally. In the end, his attribute panel looked like this. Name Ye Qing, level 1 max class. Abyss Collector, strength 20, agility 20, intelligence 20, willpower 20, constitution 20, luck 20. Meanwhile, the group of hunters continued fighting, saying that only those last 2 monsters remained. After defeating them, the shield bearer asked Lao Chen if he's serious about saying that the collector changed class to collector. He wonders if that hidden class wasn't on that class list he always checks. Another member says it's not that important because every year a new class is added to the list, but the most valuable ones remain the same. These so-called hidden classes are usually just a joke. Lao Chen says that considering the protagonist level is at most 1, then he must be an F rank, just a bit stronger than a level 0, so there's almost no difference. The group leader says they should let it go, continue what they're doing, and stay alert at all times. They keep walking and finally reach a higher point. However, the moment they look at what's ahead, they're completely shocked. A completely dark monster is standing before them. The leader says the mission target has been found, as those are the remains of the captain and the falcon hunting team. The girl with them is confused, saying there's a pile of them, and not even in that shopping mall, especially not on the 5th floor. The man with glasses approaches one of the bodies and says the abyssification hasn't even lasted 48 hours, and yet the corpses are already completely dehydrated. He says it's possible their essence was drained using some kind of magic. The woman says that up until now, they had only encountered low-level spirit wolves. So if the falcon hunting team was B rank or higher, this is really strange since they were all defeated and killed there. They start hearing a strange noise and the leader looks to the side and is completely shocked as several monsters begin appearing out of nowhere. He yells that it's not just wolves that are there. Meanwhile, on TV, the news report announces an important alert. An abyssification has occurred at Shunfeng Public Mall. Initially rated as a grade B mutation, the current number of missing people has already reached 217. Back inside, the leader shouts in fear, telling everyone to retreat immediately, saying it's an ambush. Lao Chen starts using his flame and yells that he had found it very suspicious not to see the bodies of the previous hunting team, but it turns out they were all piled up in that mountain of corpses. The leader says the weak demonic beasts along the way were only there to lure them deeper into the dungeon. As they defend against the first wave of attacks, they begin to see something much bigger starting to move. The leader looks and says that the true voice of that dungeon has appeared. It's a carnivorous plant from the abyss, rank A. Lao Chen shouts for everyone to look up because the hunters who had died came back to life and were attacking. While all this is happening, the protagonist is still recycling the corpses of the low-level spirit wolves. After recycling several bodies, a system screen pops up in front of him, saying he reached the novice collector milestone by recycling 50 corpses. He starts laughing, saying he finally unlocked an achievement. The system informs him that he'll receive the following rewards, which makes him very happy because he wasn't expecting any. His rewards are a low-grade heart collector and a very ordinary dagger. He's extremely disappointed, saying that while the dagger might be usable, the rewards are really bad. As he's there examining his rewards, he starts hearing very loud noises, looks up, and wonders if something's coming toward him. Screams start growing louder in his direction, and a zombie begins running to attack him, which terrifies him. He dodges the first strike and backs away. The system says he triggered an agility check, emphasizing that he successfully evaded with a flashy move. He shouts that the monster scared him so much, he thought he was going to die. He begins to analyze his own body and feels like he's become significantly more agile, wondering if it's because of the attribute points he distributed. He clenches his fist and smiles, thinking he's finally become stronger. However, the monster that attacked him charges forward again, giving him no time to react. Just as he's about to be hit, his body reacts extremely fast. He manages to dodge another attack. He pulls back a bit and thinks it's not just his agility that's improved, but also his strength. Feeling confident, he activates his spiritual boost ability and charges forward, saying it's his turn to attack now. As he rushes in, he thinks that he's finally become the hunter instead of the prey. He lands a punch on the monster, sending it flying, saying that this time he won't just tickle his opponents. The system appears again, saying he triggered a new strength check, noting that he caused a breakthrough in the target's defense, doubling his physical damage. The monster starts groaning in pain and shaking. Ye begins to smile and says that this is his new version, and it's way better than the old one. The system screen appears again, saying that thanks to his 20 points in intelligence, the protagonist's perception has been significantly enhanced, allowing him to detect hidden traps and weak points in his targets. The monster starts moving again, and now, with his new analysis ability, Ye can see that its essence level is parasitic, and that its weaknesses are fire and its neck. The monster lets out another roar and charges full speed, but this time, instead of dodging, Ye also starts moving forward. The monster attacks with everything it has, but the protagonist manages to dodge and slips under it, going for its back. He starts summoning his dagger, thinking that the monster's weak point is its neck, and with a quick strike, he manages to hit the nape of its neck. The system notifies that he triggered another luck check. The effect of the common dagger was activated and the target received a bleeding effect. Ye steps back a bit and realizes he cut directly through the root on the monster's neck. The system notifies that he killed the parasitized human. The purple liquid on his hand begins to evaporate. The system says he triggered a constitution check and was able to resist the poisoning effect. That liquid simply starts disappearing from his body. He looks at his dagger happy, saying that his first time killing something on his own was a complete success. His collector ability identifies the parasitized human and says he can be recycled too, asking if the protagonist wants to do it. He says yes, and his skill begins devouring the corpse. Shortly after, the system says the parasitized human has been successfully recycled, and the protagonist acquired a passive ability, toxic evolution. His new skill, the effects of being poisoned are reversed and randomly turned into a beneficial effect for the user. Requires Constitution 15. Seeing this, he asks if that means he can drink spoiled potions as if they were normal. He uses the skill card, and the system confirms that the passive ability, Toxic Evolution, has been added. In addition, he received 5 more unassigned attribute points and also disintegrated the spoiled potion. The system warns that it's highly toxic and shouldn't be consumed, but he looks at his skill card and thinks that with his new Toxic Evolution ability, the poison will turn into something very beneficial. With that in mind, he starts drinking the highly toxic potion to see what happens. The system informs that due to Toxic Evolution, the critical effect was transformed into a healing effect, and all the damage he had taken up to that point was instantly healed. The system also notifies that he acquired the buff essence. All attributes doubled for 10 minutes. Ye says the randomly gained effects are so strong that he can feel his strength gradually increasing. He opens the attribute panel once again and remembers that after increasing intelligence to a certain number, he gained more info about his targets. So he decides to use the 5 attribute points on intelligence. Currently, his base stats are Strength 20, Agility 20, Intelligence 25, Willpower 20, Constitution 20, and Luck 20. However, because of the buff he received, his strength is at 40, Agility 40, Intelligence 50, Willpower 40, Constitution 40, and Luck 40. While analyzing his attribute points, he hears another sound approaching. He starts wondering if it's more monsters. When he turns around, he sees it's not just one monster, but a small army of them. He stands still, thinking that he was always called a burden to society, trash, useless. That's how everyone always treated him. But now he can proudly say, his name is Ye Qing, an abyss collector. He activates his ability and grips his dagger tightly, saying they can all come at him because he only has 2 times to fight, daytime and nighttime. Meanwhile, on the 5th floor, their fight was still going. However, they were starting to feel overwhelmed because the entire Falcon team had been parasitized. The leader tries to defend himself but realizes that even though those monsters are just the bodies, they're stronger than they were alive, not to mention the boss itself, the carnivorous plant from the abyss. He shouts to the whole group that they need to retreat immediately. They start running while Lao Chen tries to clear a path with his fire magic, but the woman gets hit in the back and the man with glasses had already been killed. The leader just keeps running, saying the monsters are still chasing them no matter what they do. Lao Chen, trembling in fear, thinks those monsters are too strong and they won't be able to do anything more. With that, he just keeps running non-stop. The shield bearer tries to block an attack while Lao Chen keeps running. He thinks he only came there for money and gear, so dying there would be a waste. Suddenly, the team leader starts being enveloped by a strange magic and can't move properly. He looks at Lao Chen and asks what he's doing, saying they're a team. Lao Chen apologizes to his boss but points out that he needs to hold the monsters off as long as possible. He abandons his leader to his fate and starts running, saying that when he comes back, he'll spend a little more on his funeral. The shield bearer, lying on the ground and unable to do anything, just tries to call for help but is completely ignored by his companion. While running, Lao Chen thinks he won't lose anything if he escapes now, because at least he still has the equipment he managed to grab, and at worst, he'll just have to come up with an excuse for his whole team being wiped out. However, he crashes into someone and falls to the ground. Seeing the protagonist, startled, he covers his mouth, but once he realizes it's Ye, he starts getting nervous, saying that once again that trash kid got in his way. The protagonist begins to get angry, asking if Lao Chen really betrayed all his teammates just to survive. Lao Chen, watching Ye's ability in action, asks if that's all he can do. Suddenly, he starts thinking that he can't let the protagonist leave, because if Ye reports him to the committee supervisors, he'll likely be condemned. He shouts at Ye, asking if he doesn't want to become stronger and stand out from the others. Then he says this is the moment and tries to kick the protagonist, telling him to go and become monster food. However, the kick has no effect on Ye. The system appears, saying that the strength check failed. The kick was invalid and will have negative effects. Lao Chen falls to the ground in pain, screaming and insulting the protagonist, asking what he's doing. Ye begins to release his aura, cursing Lao Chen, saying that he may be trash, but anyone who abandons their friends is worse than trash. Without hesitation, he begins using his ability. Lao Chen starts shaking and screaming, "What is this?" begging for help and calling for his mother, but he is dragged away by the hands. The ability notifies that the trash triangle is in progress, but that trash is not recyclable. The hands throw him back to the ground, and the protagonist says that apparently not all trash can be recycled. Suddenly, another notification appears saying the recycling skill has been upgraded. Now, the target's useless abilities can be recycled with their consent. Additionally, Ye receives another card saying he is the Spellmaster, the 3-minute experience card. If the target is unconscious, consent is given by default, which is very convenient. He uses the 3-minute experience card. With it, he gains control over all flames. The Fireball skill requires 15 intelligence points, and he has 50 in total. By activating the dark effect, the fireball evolves into Grand Flame Explosion. Several monsters begin moving again. Ye looks back and sees they're getting closer and closer. He starts trying to figure out how to use the fireball skill and tries to remember how Lao Chen did it last time. When he uses it, it creates an extremely powerful explosion. The flash takes over the entire floor, and all the monsters in front of him are completely disintegrated. He gets irritated with himself, saying he didn't have time to recycle the bodies and begs them not to turn into smoke so easily. However, another monster appears at the top of the stairs and stealthily advances behind him. But Ye senses the presence of someone else and dodges at the last second. He moves away from the opponent, who keeps pressing forward without giving him any time, but none of its blows can land. Ye grabs his dagger again and begins fighting on equal footing with that monster. He starts thinking that he still hasn't learned any close combat skill. He looks back and sees the body of the shield bearer, thinking that might work. He says the shield bearer wouldn't want to be resurrected by that boss after death, so maybe he should help him become stronger. Using his ability, he begins to consume the entire body of the shield bearer, thus gaining the golden shield. Immediately, he starts using the shield, and in the middle of the opponent's charge, he spots a weakness and rushes in, smashing the monster's head with the shield and winning the battle with relative ease. Without wasting time, he apologizes to the former hunter, who had been parasitized but says he needs to recycle that body too. He asks the former warrior to rest in peace. Upon absorbing the body of the former hunter, he gains the Dagger Demon card. Now, he can use a dagger like an assassin and unleash a flurry of stab attacks. He quickly uses the card and gains another ability. Upon absorbing it, he says the dagger now feels more flexible in his hand. A story is told. Their fight was brutal. The committee states that the protagonist's mission is to find the Falcon Group and bring them out of the dungeon. Instantly, the response to that is yes. The committee says that if their bodies aren't found, the mission will be considered a failure and no payment will be given. The battle continued, and with each moment, the protagonist gained more abilities. By recycling the bodies, he managed to gain speed, and his strength and agility attributes increased significantly, in addition to becoming immune to control skills. The man telling the story says he already knows he won't get anything. The committee asks if he has found the bodies of the Falcon Group. He replies yes, but that they've all been recycled. The committee asks what he's talking about, and the man says all the corpses and monsters were taken into the abyss by that person. At the Abyss Supervisory Committee building in the interrogation room, Lao Chen is sitting in front of the evaluators, trembling with fear. The committee says he was the only survivor from that dungeon, so the person he's referring to doesn't exist. And furthermore, there's something very strange. When they found Lao Chen's body lying on the ground, his level had been reduced to 1, something that's never been seen before. Driven mad, Lao Chen starts screaming that it was exactly like he said, his abilities were recycled by that person. And that's the proof that he's the trash collector. But he doesn't sound credible saying that. The committee states that the Abyss's energy pollution level is so high that it's possible he was recycled and then spat back out, which is what's causing hallucinations. That's the main theory proposed by the assassination team. Lao Chen keeps yelling that it's not true and insists he's telling the truth, that he wouldn't lie about it. He insists that everything really happened. The trash collector did all of it at the entrance to the rank B Abyss. After all that, the protagonist sold the magic crystals on the black market, but received only 30% of their value since crystal trading is monopolized by large corporations and private transactions are illegal. The black market charges 70% as a handling fee. The magic crystals he brought were barely enough to pay what he owed the loan sharks from some time ago. However, since then, there have been no more incidents. He looks at his own hands and thinks that he's a bit afraid of using his recycling ability in front of others, as they might report it to the supervisors. Not to mention that he awakened an extremely strange class, so it wouldn't be impossible for them to lock him up for a year to run major experiments. The protagonist concludes that he needs to earn as much money as possible while he's still a free man. Among several other people, the group leader says that Abyss just appeared, and everything is still extremely new. So everyone there needs to be aware of the risks involved. That's why the rewards will be doubled. He emphasizes that only people with a class qualification and a rank higher than B can sign up for the mission. Ye asks the leader if he thinks someone like him would qualify. The leader asks what his rank is. The protagonist pulls off his hood and says he's a level 1 collector. Everyone starts laughing and the leader slaps his hand, saying that even a piece of trash like him has the nerve to consider himself a classed individual. He says the protagonist should get in line with the rest of the trash. However, that's exactly what Ye wanted. He thinks that if everyone there believes he's weak, they'll lower their guard and probably place him in the back of the group, acting as a simple support. And in that case, even if he secretly collects bodies and trash, no one will notice. It's a dangerous plan, but a brilliant one. Suddenly, another person arrives and says they should get going. People start commenting that she's the daughter of a famous family, the one who awakened a God-chosen class. The woman tells the leader that if they take the protagonist, then they'll have enough people. Others keep commenting that she's the rising star of the hunting group, and also known as the Chosen of God. Her name is Liu Xingran. The leader still hesitates a bit, saying that kid is clearly level 1, and, on top of that, a novice without any proof or qualification. Jingren says it doesn't matter if he's a novice, and it wouldn't matter even if everyone was level 1 because they're all just there to be numbers, so they're all the same as trash. The leader agrees with her and says their only responsibility is to protect her, since that place belongs to her family, so it's only natural that she has the final say. Ye breathes a sigh of relief, thinking that was a close one, as he thought he'd be kicked out again. However, this isn't the first time he's acted like simple trash. Suddenly, Shingren looks at the protagonist without saying a word. He gets a little uneasy and starts wondering where he saw her for the first time, until he remembers it was back when he hadn't awakened yet, around 2 years ago. She was in danger, and her weapon had broken, but he stepped in, and without hesitation, managed to land a critical hit on the monster, finishing it and saving her life. Still shaken from the situation, Shingren asks if he's really a trash collector. Then how did he manage to kill demonic beasts? Suddenly, Ye starts celebrating, shouting that he did it, that it was his first time. He finally managed to earn a single experience point. He turns and asks if she's okay. Shingren says she really had heard the rumors, but didn't believe anyone was actually trying to level up that way. She asks if it's true, if he's really trying to gain experience like that and why. The protagonist says the reason is obvious. He needs money. He bends down to pick up the magic crystals and she stands up, saying she can't believe someone is actually doing that, since that method could cost him his life. But the only thing that caught his attention was that the monster gave a lot of magic crystals. He turns to her and asks what she really knows, because people with good classes like her always think they're superior. So how could she understand how hard the life of trash like them is? He continues doing his work while saying she's the one who abandoned the group and went off alone. He asks if she's really trying to waste her life facing that many demonic beasts, since she charged at them without hesitation. That makes him wonder and ask if she's really trying to prove something. She gets irritated and says yes because she needs to get stronger, as she wants to be the first person to conquer that place. Ye asks what place she's talking about, but she changes the subject and asks him to tell her the real reason he wants a class so badly. Without thinking twice, the protagonist says it's because of his family. He explains that he wants to become stronger so he can protect his whole family. Smiling, she asks for his name and the protagonist introduces himself as Ye Qing. Still smiling, she introduces herself and says she truly hopes to see him succeed someday. She emphasizes that once he manages to get his class, he should join her group so they can conquer that place together. She extends her hand to him, but the protagonist is a bit confused since it's the first time he's actually been treated like a human and not like trash. Even so, he ends up accepting and takes her hand, saying it's a deal, and that she better not hold him back when the time comes. She says she'd like to see him again after he changes classes, since she just killed 30 demonic beasts on her own and he only killed 1. Actually, half, since he only landed the finishing blow. Suddenly, some people appear there. They say they've been looking for her for ages, and question how she could sneak into the depths of an abyss. The reality of the world returns to normal. People start cursing at the protagonist, saying he shouldn't go near her again. They grab Shingren and start dragging her away, saying the president is furious and nearly ended everything, and even though she asked them to wait, they completely ignore her. At the last second, she throws a crystal up, telling the protagonist to catch it, and with a smile on her face, she says it's his reward for killing half a monster. He turns around and starts walking away, thankful for that. However, he doesn't exactly remember what her name is. He asks if it's Liu Xingren. The leader smacks him on the head, shouting that yes, she really is Xingren, and asks where he's looking, ordering him to get moving and enter the portal. He looks at her and says he'll do his best not to be a burden to everyone. She looks at him without saying anything. A few seconds later, she says it's fine and asks everyone to grab their gear and get ready to enter. Once everyone is ready, they begin heading toward the entrance of the abyss. Make it back alive. He remembers that when he fought to escape the abyss last time, he mastered the warrior's shield, became an assassin, and also gained berserker skills. But what truly made it worth it was that he finally obtained a boss-level skill, super regeneration of man-eating plants. Because of the way he distributes points on his radar chart, no matter what career he chooses, he'll have no weaknesses, as his strength, agility, intelligence, willpower, luck, and constitution are all balanced. His attribute points are equally divided among those 6 stats, and the total he can gather is around 100 points, especially since he was the only one who cleaned up all the recyclables in the last abyss. Still, he starts to wonder what level someone would need to be to match 100 points. He uses his skill, Observation Eyes, Attribute Perception. He observes that the strength attribute of the man in front of him is only 12 points, and his weakest stat is intelligence with just 1 point. He thinks that if the strength of a normal human is 1, then a warrior with 12 points is approximately 12 times stronger than an average person. But his own strength is already at 100, meaning he's around 100 times stronger than a regular human. As he analyzes all this, they keep walking until something moves and a loud noise is heard. The whole group looks back, and the leader asks what happened and whether it was a small earthquake or something like that. In reality, it was a trap. However, Ye managed to hold it back with just the strength of one arm, pushing the wall back and preventing it from crushing someone. He remarks that the structure of that underground space is very unstable. Suddenly, someone else arrives, shouting that they found a chest, drawing everyone's attention and allowing the protagonist to breathe a sigh of relief for not being noticed. When they reach the chest, the leader says, "This is total crap because they don't have any assassins in the team. And that chest looks like it's rank A." The protagonist raises his hand and says he can open it. However, the whole group is confused as to how a level 1 person could open something like that. He walks up and effortlessly opens the chest, leaving everyone stunned. He thinks that opening that lock is as easy as eating, but the rest of the group can't believe he did it so easily. The leader says that lockpicking skills like that can only be learned by assassins above level 5. Ye explains that a level 1 collector can learn a bunch of useful skills because they come across lots of unopened chests while cleaning up trash. The leader ends up understanding and says they'll divide the items once the mission is over. For now, they should keep moving. The group agrees, but they hear a small sound. Ye asks the woman next to him to stand still for a second because it seems like there's something ahead. He throws a rock, and the walls quickly begin to move. This way, he triggers a trap and prevents a fatal incident. The woman looks a bit uneasy and questions whether the protagonist is really level 1. Ye asks her not to think too much about it, saying they just happen to run into something he's good at. He finds a lot of traps while picking up trash, so he usually suffers because of them. That's how he ended up unlocking the trap perception skill, and there's nothing strange about it. Shingren was behind the two of them and hears the whole explanation. However, she remains silent, saying nothing. All 3 members of the group end up accepting the explanation, saying they understand. The system appears saying, "Deception check, success. Target has become more persuadable." The protagonist begins to wonder if this is the power of having 100 intelligence points. The leader starts treating him a little better and gives him an item, saying it's a reward, and tells him to use it proudly. He says it's the one-handed broken mace, a normal class weapon that can be used by a level 1. Ye starts thinking that apparently his evaluation in the minds of the others still isn't very high. The leader tells them to keep moving until they finally arrive at a large room with something in the center. The group asks what the deal is with that and wonders if it's some kind of secret treasure at the end of the abyss. However, they start laughing, saying that getting there was extremely easy, and begin to think it might be the kind of abyss with reward rooms, the type that only contains items and no monsters. The system explains that this is the reward room, a room with no monsters containing only some treasures, a unique type location within an abyss. Jingren asks the group not to get overconfident and to pay attention to places where monsters might spawn. One of the group members walks up to the plaque and holds it in his hand, saying, "There's no way that stone plaque is the only thing in this abyss." He turns, letting his guard down, and asks if now that they've found the last treasure, they can leave. However, the chalice in front of him begins acting strangely. Suddenly, it starts to emit an absurd amount of blood, and the system announces that the blood trial has begun. Shingren curses that member, calling him an idiot, and points out that this isn't an abyss reward but a trap. She says the thing in front of them is the blood nightmares. Shingren opens her inventory, grabs her sword, and shouts for everyone to get ready to fight. The blood monsters begin surrounding them. The protagonist says that to avoid exposing his attributes, he should fight using only 20% of his power. At that moment, the ring on his finger is the trash weakness ring. Its effect reduces all the wearer's stats to a chosen percentage. When he first got the item, he was furious, wondering what kind of trashy ring only serves to lower your stats. But now he thinks that no matter how useless something may seem, it can always become extremely useful one day. The battle begins. Ye uses his spiritual dash and charges at the monsters. Even limiting his strength to 25%, he destroys everything in front of him with a single strike. This catches Shingren's attention, and seeing that he did all that with just one move, she realizes everything around him is being destroyed. One of the monsters takes advantage of her distraction and tries to attack her. However, Shingren hadn't let her guard down, and with one move, she destroys the monster. Meanwhile, the horned warrior is struggling. He asks what's going on because even after blasting the monster with a hit, it begins to condense and take human form. The blood nightmare, in its original state, is fragile, but when it attacks humans, it strengthens based on the opponent and mimics their form. Even so, the warrior doesn't back down and manages to slash the monster in front of him. The mage shouts, praising the attack, but the monster, even wounded, doesn't fall. It counterattacks, cutting off one of the warrior's arms. He falls, screaming in pain, and the mage, in despair, says, "Decapitation doesn't work, so how are they supposed to win against those things?" The monster prepares for the final blow and attacks with everything. At the last second, its sword stops inches from the warrior. Shingren had completely frozen the monster and asks if they could be just a little less useless. She touches the monster and shatters it entirely. Shingren points out that this is just a bloody nightmare and says they're embarrassing themselves just as expected, because a piece of trash is still trash in the end. The monsters keep attacking. With the warrior on the ground, the mage tries to attack but shouts that there's no time to cast spells since the monsters are moving too fast. Ye says that if swords don't work on those monsters, then they'd better just barbecue them all. He uses Grand Fire Explosion destroying several monsters at once. Once again, the entire group is left speechless. The mage screams that Grand Fire Explosion is an S-rank spell, and casting it instantly is basically impossible. She asks if something's wrong. How can a level 1 player do that? More monsters begin appearing and advancing. They let out a loud roar, however, Ye does the same, and his roar stuns the monsters. Berserker mode is a skill exclusive to Berserkers. Speed is increased by 100%, strength as well, and damage taken also doubles. With one punch, he completely explodes the blood nightmares, but he notices blood fragments flying all around him. When he looks back, the monster he just destroyed starts to fully regenerate, but with something different. The mage, still frightened, says that monster duplicated. The creature begins to evolve, transforming into a blood nightmare king. The group starts shouting, asking how a king-level monster could appear in a B-rank abyss. That's why they're certain something's wrong there. Ye says that monster can mimic its target's form and grow stronger by facing stronger enemies. That blood nightmare absorbed the protagonist's attributes and instantly evolved into a king-level monster. The blood nightmare begins its assault, but Ye manages to dodge. As he pulls back slightly, he wonders if that monster's attributes are enough to match his own, because if that's true, it means there's no way to win by overpowering it. Shingren steps forward and calls the protagonist a useless little fish, telling him to get out of the way because she wants to handle that powerful opponent. The monster starts attacking her too, but with her speed, she's able to dodge and begins climbing up its body. With her freezing sword, she attacks and begins freezing parts of the monster. Ye is surprised to see that she can use domain-level ice control, but it still isn't enough. With its other hand, the demon strikes, landing a direct hit and throwing her to the ground. She gets up and even without major injuries thinks that it's not going to work this way because she's still too weak. Some time ago, she was at the edge of an abyss, and her guards warned her that the abyss's energy was highly unstable, asking if she really wanted to go in alone. Shingren kept preparing and thought her goal was to conquer that place once and for all, the highest darkness level of the Tower of the End. However, her growth rate is still far below that of her brothers and sisters. She stands up and keeps thinking that, honestly, to be a princess, she doesn't even come close to them. The blood nightmare keeps attacking, and she begins gathering energy around her, thinking that if she can't easily eliminate the abyss, she's not worthy of inheriting her family's name. Liu Xingren opens her eyes with intense focus and creates a barrier around herself, managing to block the attack. A flag appears beside her and she slams it into the ground. That's the Frost Banner. The system appears and says, "Haste! All allies within a 30-meter radius gain a 50% speed boost." The ground in front of her starts freezing and quickly reaches the monster, freezing it completely. With her boosted speed, she charges forward. She thinks that the Ice Demon specializes in restraining water-type monsters. Even if it can't kill, it'll no longer be a threat if it's frozen. Shingren uses Comet Strike, an extremely powerful blow that manages to slash the monster. The protagonist watches and says that this must be the legendary God-chosen class. However, he's still uncertain, wondering who is stronger, the king-level Blood Nightmare or the God-chosen Knight. As she finishes her attack and pulls back slightly, she looks at the monster and starts to wonder if her attack had any effect at all. The part she managed to cut falls to the ground, but the king-level Blood Nightmare remains intact. It continues attacking, but none of its blows land. While fighting, she thinks that even though she's an S rank, her strength still doesn't come close to her older siblings. She keeps dodging while questioning her own power, thinking that even though she carries the Liu name, she always feels like she's being left behind. And clearly she is the weakest member of the entire family, always mocked and ridiculed, called the disgrace of the Liu family, with people questioning how they could have such a weak sister, saying she should just stay home because the abyss is too dangerous for someone so fragile. With all that weight and those repressed feelings in her heart, she gathers her strength, thinking that she wants to become the strongest, even if that means starting with a beginner's abyss. Because as long as she keeps challenging greater hardships, she'll be able to surpass everyone one day. And to surpass everyone, she must be capable of facing every challenge by herself. She lands a blow on the monster's head with all her strength, but it's not enough. Ye looks slightly alarmed and she notices something behind her. The monster lands a direct hit, slamming her into the ground with immense force. From that attack, she begins coughing up blood. The team's mage starts panicking, shouting that the monster was able to defeat even Shingren, an S-rank hunter. So everyone needs to get out of there immediately. The Blood Nightmare prepares to deliver the finishing blow to her, but the protagonist won't allow it and once again uses his firepower, destroying one of the monster's arms. The severed arm flies toward the rest of the group, who scramble to dodge. Thanks to that attack, Xingren manages to get up. Ye was going to face the monster head-on. He uses his observation eye skill to find the monster's weakness. He thinks that if that monster really reaches king level, it will gain resistance to abnormal conditions. And if the level is high enough, it might become completely immune to freezing, stunning, paralysis, and slowing. As the levels progress, even places that were originally weak points will no longer be. That's why he thinks there's no reason to keep holding back and decides to activate all his attributes. He gathers an immense amount of fire in his hand and with a punch causes the monster tremendous pain, but it's still not enough to defeat it. The monster counterattacks, but the protagonist manages to get out of range. While Shinrin takes a healing potion, the mage is impressed by the protagonist's speed. He keeps dodging and attacking like it's nothing. His movements are truly impressive, like those of a real assassin. He begins releasing even more power, thinking that as long as he can find the weakness of that king-level monster, he'll be able to reach his goal. He attacks with consecutive fireballs, causing great damage. However, he thinks that no matter what part he destroys, it will always regenerate, and he hasn't managed to identify any weakness on the monster's entire body. However, he notices the monster seems to be remotely controlled by something. When an object was removed, a trail of blood appeared, indicating that the cube had something to do with the blood nightmare. He asks the group to throw it to him. The warrior sees the block in front of him and with a 3-fingered kick, makes a perfect throw. The system screen appears saying the intelligence test was successful and that he can now decipher the ancient writing on the block. The system begins decoding the ancient enchantment on the block to break the blood curse. Ye is shocked and thinks the solution was right under everyone's noses, and if he had used the observation eye from the start, all of this could have been solved. The monster grabs the plaque in midair, puts it in its mouth, and enters invincible mode. The group asks why the monster is no longer moving, and the protagonist gets frustrated, saying he was too careless. Now that monster has gone into invincible mode. Shinrin approaches him and asks if they've met before because when she heard him for the first time before entering the dungeon, his voice sounded familiar. Ye is surprised and asks if she really didn't recognize him. He explains that he met her in the Abyss 2 years ago and says he was the trash collector who took her experience point, the first one he ever earned in his life. She remembers and brings up the 29.5 points she got from that monster. So, he's that brat who took her 0.5 point. Shinrin says she remembers now, but can't recall his name. She throws out a few guesses, making him a little uncomfortable, so he decides to tell her his name is Ye Qing. She's surprised and happy at the same time because she never imagined he'd succeed just through hard work. He confirms she's right and says he's now a level 1 collector. Shinrin is amazed because he'd always risked his life for experience, slowly accumulating his points, and still managed to become incredibly strong. He asks why she's looking at him like that. She smiles and says it's a little embarrassing to say it out loud. She taps her sword on the ground again and says the block will orbit around the Blood Nightmare's body, so her control over the ice demon can freeze it for a short time. Shinrin asks the protagonist to use that brief moment to locate the block. Yes smiles and says he expected that, because no matter who you are, there are always moments when you can't handle a challenge alone. With a smile on his face and confidence in his heart, he tells her to consider this a 0.5 reward and emphasizes that they'll work together to defeat that monster. She smiles and gives him a high five, saying he better not slow her down. The rest of the group yells at both of them, telling them to wait a bit because they want to join the battle too. Even if they're not much help, they want to fight with everything they've got. Yes smiles and says it's fine, so they'll do it all together, and emphasizes that they'll definitely all make it out alive. They get ready. Meanwhile, the plate starts acting inside the monster. The protagonist pays attention to this and says they still have 5 seconds until invincible mode ends, and after that the monster will enter berserker mode and attack non-stop for 30 seconds. He turns and tells the whole group to listen carefully because these are the last 30 seconds of opportunity they'll have, and they must return alive no matter what. Even though they're very afraid, the whole group gets fired up and shouts that they'll return alive no matter what it takes. A system alert appears stating that the intelligence test was activated and the spirit boost was successful. Shinrin also receives this buff, and the spirit boost on her caused her fatigue value to decrease by 100%. Her magic recovery rate increased by 15% for 30 seconds. She's surprised by these effects and turns around in disbelief. She smiles and says that it seems she really can't underestimate the protagonist. She begins to coordinate the first attack and orders the warrior to keep the monster's rage low. Without hesitation, the warrior charges at his leader's command, goes up to the front of the Blood Nightmare and starts insulting it, trying to grab its attention. This works, as the monster's rage is now focused on the warrior. Wasting no time, Shinrin continues coordinating her team and asks the beloved to hit the monster's newly formed tentacles and cover the collector. She immediately gets to work and manages to restrain the monster for a while using her magic. Ye observes the situation and says the block with the griffin is the key to ending the blood trail, and that if it gets destroyed by the fireball, the blood trail will never end. Shinrin asks what they should do. Even without being sure of what he's saying, the protagonist says maybe he can pull it out with his bare hands. Shinrin is shocked by this idea and shouts that there's no way he can do that with his bare hands, questioning if he really plans to dive into the Blood Nightmare's stomach. Ye starts focusing and says, no, in fact, he's going to penetrate the monster's body. Still surprised and not fully understanding, she ends up agreeing and tells the archer to hit the ceiling so the falling rocks can create a platform for the protagonist to jump from. The archer says he got it and prepares, firing a powerful shot at the ceiling, causing an explosion above the monster. Shinrin uses her flag again and shouts that she's going to freeze the lower half of the Blood Nightmare. Ye gets ready to act and says they can leave the rest to him. The two launch the attack. The monster notices this and starts attacking them as well. However, all the attacks are avoided, and the protagonist charges in without fear. The reason he advances so confidently is because his super regeneration ability can instantly heal light wounds, so he can ignore minor attacks from the Blood Nightmare. Shinrin drives her flag into the ground, freezing the monster and temporarily immobilizing it. Ye takes advantage of the opening and leaps. She shouts for him to hit the chest area since it's the easiest to penetrate. The protagonist says he can't go that fast and activates his Berserker mode, gaining 20% more speed. He also uses his Toxic Rush skill, and the potion's effect is reversed into an additional 15% speed increase. He thinks the trash potion cards he picked up at the Abyss entrance can finally be used. A bonus effect is also granted, Hardened Skin. Defense is increased by 15%. With everything ready, he charges forward shouting, this will be his final blow. Even with his increased speed, one of the tentacles manages to intercept him. Unable to dodge midair, he gets hit. Shinrin gets worried and the protagonist is flung away. While falling, he says this is his time to shine. It was expected from a piece of trash like him, so he should have stayed low. However, he refuses to be a burden to society once again. He activates his recycling skill and says the recycling target is himself. He starts to fall and his own skill begins trying to recycle him. The monster is confused and so is the entire group. They begin asking what kind of power this is and where it came from. Ye stands up as the system notifies that it's not possible to recycle a living organism, so the recycling fails. The protagonist laughs and tells his skill that if he can't be recycled, then he wants to be thrown away with all its might. He begins to smile, knowing his plan is about to begin. His skill throws him again toward the monster, and this time, the speed is even greater since the force of his ability is astronomical. In the blink of an eye, he pierces through the monster's body, grabbing the griffin. On the other side, with the griffin in hand, he says he did it. As he lands, the monster falls beside him, starting to melt, and the system announces that the blood trail has been completed. The monster begins to dissolve. Seeing this scene, the entire group remains stunned, asking what just happened. Shinrin, also shocked, asks if they really managed to win. As reality sets in, they begin to celebrate and the system says everyone is leveling up. Everyone's strength, agility, intelligence, determination, constitution, and luck start increasing. Shinrin is also surprised to see her stats increase. Strength plus 33, agility plus 28, intelligence plus 38, determination plus 26, constitution plus 21, and luck plus 34. Meanwhile, the system says Ye failed to level up because he's already at max level and a bit embarrassed, he says that was expected. Suddenly, a treasure chest appears in the middle of them all and the group is impressed. It's the real treasure. Once opened, several powerful cards emerge. One of them goes straight into the protagonist's hand, an extremely powerful weapon card that grants plus 88 attack. However, the required level to use it is 10. He's a little disappointed since his max level is only 1, and the system promptly notifies him that he doesn't meet the requirements. He throws the card to the ground, frustrated, saying all those shiny items he wanted so badly are now completely useless to him, and he's sad, wanting to cry. Shinrin picks up some cards and calls Ye, saying that he was the one who completed the blood trail and was undoubtedly the biggest contributor among them, so he should be the one to distribute the items. A little shy, he smiles and says it was nothing. He walks up to her and speaks more quietly, saying he has something to talk to her about. Shortly afterward, outside the portal, several agents were waiting. Their leader says they must contact the 4th General and prepare to send in a rescue team immediately. Suddenly, Shinrin appears at the portal's exit, saying there's no need. She exits with the entire group intact, and the leader even sheds tears of joy seeing his lady is safe. Even reporters are there, shouting that this was expected of Miss Shinrin, since she managed to clear the abyss on her own. The rest of the group starts saying their goodbyes and quietly agrees to keep it all secret. She waves at everyone and, in front of everyone present, claims she did it all herself, asking why they were so worried and if they really thought she couldn't do all that on her own. She smiles and says that after all, she's an S rank. A little earlier, still inside the abyss, she asks what the protagonist wanted to talk to her about so badly. He says her family definitely doesn't have money problems and asks if he can sell those items to her. With a discount, he charges 500 magic crystals. Even without understanding, she immediately agrees, saying it's no problem. However, he adds that there's one more thing. He asks that when they leave, she pretends he was never there and insists she take full credit for the abyss, as if she had done it all alone. Once again, she's extremely confused, but agrees with what he just said. He turns and begins to say goodbye to her, saying they can go ahead and he'll leave secretly afterward. Shinrin agrees to everything. However, she's a bit uneasy, thinking the protagonist is setting her up to owe him a favor. Once everyone leaves the abyss and everything is quiet, Ye takes the griffin and sits alone on the ground. He extends his hand, sensing something, and as a small piece of the blood nightmare appears, he smiles. He leans down and tells the little nightmare that even something weak like him doesn't want to be trash and let others decide for him. So, he offers the nightmare to become part of his strength. He captures the blood nightmare with his skill and suddenly a message appears. Recycling successful. Blood nightmare, skill acquired. Humanoid nightmare consumes life essence to summon a nightmare clone. The clone can imitate the host by dealing or receiving damage. It will dissipate immediately after the effect is triggered. This skill can be upgraded. Cooldown time, 305. Upon seeing the full description, the protagonist says it's a great skill, and that in future battles, he's really looking forward to working together with the Nightmare. Sometime later in another place, the protagonist is sitting at a table drinking coffee while analyzing his card system. He thinks about how he gave all the higher requirement items to Shingren. However, now that he thinks a bit more about it, an unknown collector holding several shiny pieces of equipment would definitely be noticed by a group of supervisors. However, all that trash he's been wearing is so unnoticeable that the supervisors wouldn't even care, even if he were selling it in secret. He leans back in the chair and takes a deep breath, thinking he's overthinking it because no one would buy that trash anyway. Absent-mindedly, while holding his cup, he touches the recycle button, and suddenly, the system shows that one piece of equipment was recycled. BP gained basic point. Upon seeing that, he's a bit surprised and questions whether he really recycled an item by accident. A bit doubtful, he goes to read the tutorial. The tutorial says that recycling is done by processing the selected trash, and after a preliminary classification, BP is a universal substance extracted from recycling useless equipment, which can be used for improvement, repair, and crafting of new items. Ye is very surprised to realize that those pieces of junk equipment can be recycled. The tutorial system gives him a task, asking him to complete the repair of the common dagger. A bit confused, he wonders if he really needs to complete the task. Following the hints, the tutorial informs him that repairing the common dagger costs 5 BP. He sees that the remaining durability of the dagger is 0.33, and he had almost thrown it away after killing the boss. He says that if he counts the BP from that accidental recycling, then he still needs 4 more. He begins recycling some trash weapons and says he needs to recycle at least 4 more. Once he gathers the necessary amount, he repairs his common dagger. However, he gets a surprise. The weapon wasn't just repaired, but the durability and attack also increased a bit. The system shows that the common dagger now has a durability of 34/34. Before, the max was 33. In other words, 1 point was added. The requirement is still level 1. The attack, which was previously 21, has now increased to 22. The repair rewards were weapon max durability +1, attack +1. Upon seeing this information, he thinks, in other words, that while equipment is constantly used and repaired, even trash items can be improved. He smiles and says that apparently, bad equipment needs to be reinforced to improve. The system congratulates him for completing the tutorial and asks him to choose a reward. The first option is a beginner's blueprint, a convenient magic potion that can instantly recover someone's mana while removing a large amount of fatigue. Or the second option, a random attribute value +2. He starts reflecting a bit and thinks that at the moment, attribute points are not scarce for him. What worries him most when venturing into the abyss is that he can't predict its depth, and many adventurers who are unprepared often run out of mana before reaching the boss room and need to backtrack to resupply. As a result, mana flasks are usually key survival tools for a group, and the value of those flasks speaks for itself. He ends up choosing the potion, and the system appears again saying, "Tip, congratulations, you have learned item regeneration." However, on the card he receives for the flask, it's written, "Convenient Magic Potion Blueprint." The protagonist wonders why it's a blueprint. The system appears again saying that the regeneration requirements for the Convenient Magic Potion are 6 BP plus a random container. Ye starts thinking that it's not surprising an item's regeneration would need BP, but he is surprised to learn it also needs a random container. He raises his hand and calls the attendant, asking if he could provide a small container. The attendant hands him 3 disposable cups. With everything in hand, he begins his production. In no time, he manages to recycle the trash completely, and now the next step is regeneration. However, he is surprised to see that even within his system, there is a focused mini-game to do everything perfectly. He draws the attendant's attention, who doesn't understand what he's doing, talking to himself at the table. A few minutes later, all the cups are filled with potions. He picks up one of the cups and says, "That's what you'd expect from a recycled item." It's a bit weird, but it's not like it's unusable. He starts drinking, and the system announces that he gained Convenient Magic Potion X5. However, he starts to feel a bit sick, shouting that it tastes like some kind of rancid juice. But instantly, he begins to feel something happening in his body. The system announces that his mana has increased and his fatigue has decreased. He says it's amazing, as he can feel his mana completely restored and his fatigue simply gone. He stores the potion cups in his inventory and leaves the shop, thinking that now he should be able to complete another abyss that day. But as soon as he exits the shop, 2 people were waiting for him outside. A bald man asks if he is Ye Qing. The protagonist becomes a bit suspicious, so he decides to remain silent. The man who asked his name says it's only been a few days and his aura has already changed completely. The bald guy touches his shoulder and smiles, asking if he found any treasure while collecting trash. He points out that he's been looking for the protagonist for a while and almost reported him missing a few days ago. Ye says he paid off all his debts with interest on debit, so he asks the man not to bother him anymore. The bald guy asks the others to leave, extinguishes the cigarette he was smoking in the protagonist's drink, and hugs him, asking if he really thinks that's all there is. He points out that maybe Ye did pay all the bills, but his work contract hasn't expired yet and adds that the protagonist shouldn't forget that a trash collector should live like a trash collector. The man starts getting angry and says Ye is acting like he's something special, asking who he's trying to impress. With a slap, he knocks the protagonist's drink to the ground, but then he starts screaming, asking how blind Ye can be because he just spilled the bald guy's drink, the sacred brown sugar pearl. People nearby also shout, saying that a level 0 knocked over a rank B awakened, and question whether he understands the consequences. The henchmen get ready and say they've always been disgusted by the sight of him. The protagonist looks at a nearby camera and thinks that, according to the supervisor regulations for awakens, using abilities outside the abyss is forbidden. The only ones allowed to activate their abilities outside the abyss are law enforcers, such as the special police. Therefore, he needs to find a blind spot in the security cameras to activate his recycling and regeneration abilities. The bald guy makes a proposal and asks what he thinks about picking up the pearls from the ground and eating them one by one. And then, when done, licking up the puddle of milk tea from the floor. He starts laughing mockingly, saying he's offering this trash collection job opportunity because, after all, it's a rare job opportunity. Already irritated with the situation, Ye says he refuses, and that's enough for the bald guy to charge at him, asking who he thinks he is. However, someone starts approaching. This person is so powerful that upon getting close, the bald guy starts trembling. That man is Rodrigo, known as Caesar, from the S-rank hunting group, Blood Oath. Caesar grabs the bald guy by the tie and asks if he has gathered enough people. The bald guy, trembling, says he's almost there, only one person left. Caesar starts getting irritated and asks where the last person is. Suddenly, he turns and calls the protagonist, saying he's hired. The bald guy says that kid is just a trash collector. The protagonist observes the two, and the bald guy keeps saying that the kind of person Caesar wants should be someone who can defend himself and promises to find that person right away. Caesar replies that when entering the abyss under the Red Moon state, all monsters become extremely fierce, and what he really needs is someone who can be used as bait. So the individual's strength doesn't matter. Upon hearing about the Red Moon, the protagonist begins thinking that during that state, monsters in the abyss go into a frenzy. Rare monsters also appear, rewards are doubled, and the quality of the magic crystals is purer. Seeing this great opportunity, he thinks for just a moment and already gets excited, saying he wants to be part of it. Caesar says that's an excellent answer and emphasizes that he likes the protagonist's determination. He calls everyone else to gather, and suddenly the protagonist hears a shout. Lao Chen appears behind him, saying it's him, but before he can say anything else, Ye charges at him, telling him to shut up. With that, they start fighting in front of everyone. The protagonist drags him to a corner, and a bit more calmly, they try to talk. Lao Chen, still scared, shouts that he's not hallucinating and emphasizes that the protagonist really is that guy. Ye explains that if he hadn't borrowed everyone's strength that time, they all would have died inside the abyss, and it's thanks to him that Lao Chen is alive now. Caesar appears from behind the wall asking if the two know each other, but the protagonist says no. Caesar turns and says that answer makes sense, because how could someone who killed his own teammates have any real friends? Ye asks Lao Chen how he managed to get out. He starts shouting that the committee originally planned to sentence him to 15 years, but he sacrificed all his assets and paid a 1.5 million fine to be released. He keeps saying that it's all the protagonist's fault and now he has no money left and lost all his levels, so he has to start over from scratch like trash. He continues yelling and threatens the protagonist, saying that if he doesn't return his levels, he'll report him to the World Committee. Ye begins to release his aura and stares directly at Lao Chen, saying he dares him to say anything to anyone, because if he does, he'll truly be turned into trash and recycled. Sometime later in the city subway, the three were arriving at the portal. Upon arrival, a level 3 bard named Zhou Tong welcomes the protagonist to the disposable team. He asks what his job is. Ye says he's a level 1 collector and his name is Ye Qing. Lao Chen also introduces himself, saying he's a level 1 mage. Zhou Tong walks up to the protagonist and says, "That's normal because they're all trash there, so there's no need to mock each other. After all, they're all there to trade their lives for money, and there's nothing nobler than that." Ye looks at that guy beside him and thinks that apparently this trash team will really be going with him. Zhou Tong keeps talking and says he'll introduce the other 2 disposable teammates. They stress that they need to choose a leader for the small disposable team. As a level 3 bard, he believes he's the most qualified for the role. A level 2 healer named Lao Zhu tells Zhou Tong that he's the highest level among them, so it's fine by him. Another group member is a level 3 warrior named Lao Zhang. He says it's fine by him too. Caesar begins to speak, saying he's going to announce something. Besides the 6 main members of Blood Oath, there will be 5 temporary members accompanying them this time. One of the Blood Oath members asks Caesar not to speak so loudly about the disposables. Another member says, "Once disposable, always disposable," mocking the rest of the awakened. Disposables are used as bait to reduce the losses of the main members. Caesar continues explaining that this abyss has the form of a labyrinth with various traps distributed in each room. He emphasizes that the disposables have the duty to find a passage to the boss room as quickly as possible and bring the information back to the main team. He starts laughing and opens the labyrinth, saying he doesn't expect any of them to have combat skills. So, if they encounter a monster, just run. In addition to all that, he explains that if they really want a share of the money, at least one of them must survive because if only one survives, that person will get all the rewards. The healer starts to cheer, and the warrior asks if he's feeling okay. However, Lao Tzu says that doesn't matter because he can't give up, since he still has 4 daughters waiting for him to bring dinner home. The warrior sighs, saying his wife is seriously ill and needs money, and begins to question what other reason he would have to accept this kind of job. As the portal fully opens, Zhou Tong calls his disposable team to enter. Lao Zhang looks at his companion and says he seems to be a newbie, but the healer thinks that's normal and asks if there isn't always a newbie in the disposable field. The warrior says that's not what he meant, rather that the newbie looks extremely relaxed and it's the first time he's seen someone so calm before entering such a difficult abyss. As soon as they enter, they start walking through the place, and their leader turns and asks if they don't find it strange that no monsters have appeared even after walking so far. Lao Chen yells at his leader to stop jinxing them by saying things like that. Lao Tzu starts looking around and asks why the environment suddenly got colder. The warrior agrees with him and says the temperature dropped. Zhou Tong continues walking while shivering from the cold, saying he already knew this could happen and should have dressed better. Distracted by the temperature, he ends up stepping on a trap and a giant blade starts falling toward him. The protagonist flicks his forehead, pulling him out of danger. However, he complains that it hurt a lot. He turns and asks what just happened. Lao Chen explains that he stepped on a trap and calls him an idiot. Ye watches the scene and wonders how their leader has survived until now. He keeps walking like nothing happened and says he's extremely lucky, yet almost got killed by that mechanism. However, his luck is only at level 1. The protagonist looks at him, saying he's not lucky, just careless. But the leader isn't discouraged and takes the lead again, saying it's no big deal, they should keep moving. However, he steps on another trap and more things start falling on him. He runs back to the middle of the group, dodging another trap. The healer stares at the things that fell and asks if those things might be alive. Suddenly, spikes start coming out of the cocoons and turn into level 5 demonized spiders, elite creatures. Demonic insect spits poison. Zhou Tong starts screaming, saying those disgusting bugs are terrifying. Quickly, Lao Chen activates his ignite and tries to attack the monsters. However, nothing happens. The group shouts that those are elite creatures. While the others are panicking, the warrior says to leave them all to him and charges in. However, one of them slips past and reaches the protagonist, trying to bite his leg. No damage is caused, and he just kicks the creature, destroying it completely. Lao Chen looks at Ye and asks why he's being so arrogant since he's nothing more than a skill thief. The system shows that the demonized spider is recyclable and has been found, and asks if he'd like to recycle it. Immediately, the protagonist decides to recycle it and gains 1 more attribute point and a new skill. It's an arcana. They're an additional type of skill that can be used on items and equipment. After 1 use, the arcana will disappear and the target item or equipment will gain the arcana's enhancing effects until it's destroyed. Arcana of the same type cannot be stacked, but various arcanas have fusion traits. Upon seeing this information, the protagonist says it looks like he can obtain not just skill cards and job cards from recycling bodies, but arcana cards too. And in addition, this type of card seems to be able to strengthen equipment. While he's thinking about these things, the warrior calls him, asking what he's doing, and says that if he doesn't want to hold everyone back, he needs to retreat quickly. The protagonist says he's going, but then takes out his dagger and says he'll test the annihilation poison on that common dagger. Upon applying the poison, the dagger changes shape. Meanwhile, Zhou Tong is just running from the monsters. While running, he thinks that even though he's the highest level person on the team, he's still scared to tell them something. One of the spiders tries to hit him, but he manages to dodge. He thinks his job actually barely has any combat skills. He can only buff others. And seeing how dangerous the situation is, he thinks the only thing he can do is buff himself with a life preservation buff. First, he starts saying that he's the elegant bard. During the battle, he must always remember to be merciful and doesn't care whether the situation involves monsters or ghosts. Everyone in his territory must be captured without mercy. Ye watches and asks what that guy is doing. The system shows that the target's buff was successful, and as soon as it happens, their leader starts running and yells that he messed up, wondering how he ended up buffing the monster instead of himself. A strengthened insect manages to be faster and charges to attack him. Zhou Tong freezes, waiting for his end. However, the protagonist appears and shatters the monster with extreme ease. But all the other monsters also got stronger. The healer starts getting worried, and the warrior yells for everyone to retreat immediately. Lao Chen can't retreat and tries to defend himself with his fire skill. However, being weakened, he can't do anything. Seeing this, Ye charges forward without hesitation and starts destroying all the monsters in front of him like it's nothing, and within seconds, he completely annihilates them. The team members are shocked by what happened and ask if it was their leader who did that. The warrior agrees, saying it must have been him. The protagonist was so fast that his team couldn't even see him destroy all the monsters because his speed is extremely high compared to theirs. While the healer and the warrior are beside their leader praising him, Ye thinks that the demonized spiders have poison resistance, which weakens the poison's effect. And for that reason, he's not impressed, since the annihilation poison is an arcana extracted by the very demonized spider. Used on itself, the effects definitely won't be obvious, but they overflow only with physical damage. Zhou Tong remains confused by the situation and asks if he really managed to defeat those spiders. He thinks he had only planned to activate a buff to oil the soles of his feet. Other monsters appear a bit farther back, and the protagonist stares at all of them, thinking that the monsters in that abyss have a certain intelligence, and if they perceive an invincible opponent, they won't attack. That will make them turn and run as their primary strategy. The monsters, sensing the protagonist's aura, begin to tremble and immediately retreat, and he says that was to be expected. Lao Chen observes the situation and comments that apparently the monsters are retreating. The healer says that's just the first room, and it's already extremely scary, so he can't even imagine what comes next. Ye starts thinking and says he already has many recycled Annihilation Poison Arcanas, and decides to keep one card as a reserve, converting the other 27 into basic BP points. He asks his skill to do exactly that, and as a result, he gains 54 BP. The leader says that now that the monsters have retreated, they can continue moving forward, and asks Lao Chen to light the torch. Zhou Tong starts walking again, saying their mission is to explore and find the boss room. He emphasizes that they must be careful from here on, and asks his team not to trigger any more traps. The protagonist looks at him and asks if he's not just saying that to himself. However, while walking, Yen notices something beside him. The system notifies him that a secret berserker area has been found. He thinks that thanks to the Red Moon's influence, new areas are emerging. Swimming alongside it, he begins to wonder if he should explore that secret area. He summons the humanoid nightmare, which creates a copy of himself. He orders the copy to walk with the team for a while, saying he'll catch up later. The copy of the protagonist starts running toward the team, and the leader asks where he went. He emphasizes that no one should fall too far behind, or they might die without anyone even knowing how. Meanwhile, inside the berserker area, Ye begins to explore and suddenly hears a loud scream. A gigantic monster was stuck to the wall behind him like a trap. He turns to see what it is, but the monster attacks. With extremely fast reflexes, he manages to dodge the first attack and distances himself from the creature. The two face each other, and the monster keeps attacking non-stop. Ye dodges again and tries to counterattack, but his attacks do absolutely nothing to the monster. This surprises him, as its physical defense makes it almost completely immune. The giant spider attacks again, and without time to dodge, the protagonist tries to block it with his arms. However, the impact is so strong, it throws him against a wall. He uses the Observer's Eye skill, and his eye shows that the monster is a level 20 Blood Mother, Rare, and Elite class. Instead of being scared, he starts smiling, saying that a rare elite has appeared before him, and that if he can kill it, maybe he can recycle something of rare level. The monster continues its attacks, trying to hit him any way it can, but the protagonist keeps running and dodging. He uses a great flame explosion to counterattack and hits the monster directly. However, once again, the attack is not very effective. The spider gets even angrier and continues attacking multiple times, but none of the blows land on the protagonist. While dodging, he thinks the monster has fire damage immunity, so he can't use that attribute as an advantage. He charges in, saying that if that's the case, then maybe he should just kill it directly. He grabs his dagger and goes on the attack. Striking the spider, he lands a critical hit on its weak spot. The spider starts screaming in pain and loses some balance. He observes the result and says that while level 5 demon spiders have poisonous bites, level 20 matriarchs lost that due to their poison resistance, and that became a weakness. He adds that this probably happened due to changes in their defenses and reproductive capability, since they no longer need to hunt alone, just command the demon spiders to do the dirty work. The monster keeps trembling in pain, feeling the effects of the poisoning. The protagonist says the most ironic thing is that these spiders become most vulnerable to their own poison. However, the matriarch doesn't give up and prepares a new strike. Yes sees this and says he didn't expect this option to be available. This time, the attack hits him, and he gets trapped in multiple webs, causing full body slow. The spider starts approaching. Still smiling, he activates his berserker mode. With extreme ease and sheer physical strength, he breaks all the threads binding him and charges at the spider with his bare hands, landing a direct punch. He simply explodes the spider completely. The system announces that the berserker card can now evolve and asks him to choose one of two routes. First route, Blood Carnage, increases berserker mode efficiency. His physical attack can ignore part of the enemy's resistance, but his life will gradually decrease until he dies or the time ends. Route 2, Unshakable Fury, increases the berserker mode duration and halves the cooldown time. He comments that most people would choose Unshakable Fury because it's the safer option. However, he's been facing monsters with high resistance, like the matriarch spider he just defeated. That's why, if he chooses Blood Carnage, he'll undoubtedly strengthen the berserker. Still, the life loss is a heavy side effect. He starts laughing and says the choice is obvious. Of course he'll choose Blood Carnage, because with the regeneration he already has, he'll be able to counterbalance the side effects. Upon choosing, the system announces his skill has just leveled up. He states that with Blood Carnage active, he'll be able to deal damage even to enemies with high physical resistance. And that's the core of this skill. Other items appear in front of him and he quickly collects them. The protagonist says those are pieces of equipment he can bring back from the abyss as an official member, especially one that he can sell for 15,000. After picking up the items, he activates his skill to recycle the rest. The system says he obtained 20 tribute points, but what excites him is discovering what kind of skill he'll get. The system shows that he obtained the rare card, Matriarch. With it, he can summon up to 4 demon spawn to fight alongside him, and evolve as they gain combat experience. Ye is surprised by this, as he now has a summon that can choose its own evolution. Meanwhile, somewhere else, the disposable team managed to find a place full of crystals. Zhou Tong is impressed, saying he didn't think they'd find a mine in that abyss. Lao Zhu points out that, besides that, those magic crystals are highly concentrated S rank. He wonders if this is another influence of the abyss during the Red Moon, since each of those crystals is worth a fortune. Without hesitation, the healer places an item among the crystals, the Eye of Argos. It marks a 60-meter radius around, allowing nearby adventurers to be notified on the map. Lao Chen gets angry about this, grabs the healer furiously, and yells asking if he's stupid, emphasizing that with those crystals, they could have been rich for life. So why is he marking it for other idiots to come and take it? The healer yells back, telling him to forget about enjoying the riches, because they'll be in serious trouble trying to stay alive if anyone finds out they're hiding something like that. The warrior approaches and says the disposable team's job is only to pave the way to the bosses. If they die, it'll be called an accident and no one will care. Experiencing this firsthand, Lao Chen is speechless, thinking about the word trash. He remembers how he used to behave, kicking, hitting, and shoving disposables, saying they were just garbage, and that it made no difference if they lived or died. However, he also remembers the moment he was recycled. Extremely irritated, he looks to the side and sees that the protagonist's clone didn't care at all, just gazing in awe at the crystals. Lao Chen thinks that even if his level is gone, as long as he can get a little money, it'll all be fine. He looks at the crystals and decides to take one, thinking that if he gets good equipment to make up for his stats, maybe he can enter the main forces of the raider group. So he sees no issue in escaping with a few. However, upon picking up the crystal, a trap system is activated. A glow at the top of the cave intensifies, and suddenly a laser blast shoots between the two, hitting Lao Zhu, who was behind. They stare at the scene, wondering what's going on. Still inside the secret area, the protagonist had summoned the demon spawn. He looks at his first summon and says the level 1 spawn seems very weak and lacks combat ability. The system announces that the spawn can evolve up to level 5 demon spider with battle points, BP, and informs that 5 BP are needed for the next level. He comments that if he wants those creatures to survive in the battlefield, he must at least bring them to level 5, so he decides to invest his points there. The spawn becomes very happy with the news, and as soon as it begins evolving, the system announces that the little spawn has evolved into a silk spider and learned to weave webs. Meanwhile, in the crystal cave, the rest of the group was still shaken by their loss. Lao Chen tries to explain, saying it was an accident. However, the warrior was extremely angry for losing one of his closest companions. Lao Zheng grabs Lao Chen by the shirt and starts shouting at him, saying that because of his greed, they lost a comrade, emphasizing that Lao Zhu was the foundation of his family. He worked himself to the bone to support everyone, and now, because of that greed, it was all thrown away. Lao Chen shouts back asking if it's wrong to want to make a little money, because if he hadn't dropped to level 1, he'd be living well by now, and he adds that on top of that, he still has to deal with people like them, a bunch of idiots. Lao Zheng begins to lose his patience and curses Lao Chen, calling him a traitor. But Lao Chen fires back saying Lao Zheng is no better than him, because in that damned world, power and money are the only things that matter, along with luck. While they were arguing, someone starts to approach and suddenly begins clapping, saying those words were well said, and that he likes that kind of worldview. Caesar shows up and asks Lao Chen if he wants to join Blood Oath, saying they've got a spot open for one more. They are surprised to see Caesar there. Another man arrives and says the body of that person is still warm. Caesar says that death is common there, and just as Lao Chen said, without power, all that's left is to trade your life for money. And wanting to make money isn't shameful, just as dying isn't either. Caesar walks up to Lao Chen and hugs him, saying that those magic crystals that appear during the Red Moon are worth entire cities. So, if he gets one, his life is set. But he forgot to mention one little thing, the price to take one of those crystals. The price requires someone to offer a humble, useless life. Another warrior appears before the three of them, and the red-haired one says that what his boss meant is that they're going to take the magic crystals from the walls and toss them in the basket. He asks if everyone understood because if they try to run, they'll be killed on the spot. Lao Zheng protests, saying that's impossible because they'll be challenging death with every crystal and asks if this is a suicide mission. Caesar asks the warrior if his wife doesn't urgently need money for treatment, or if he was just joking when he said, "I'll risk my life to earn money for her treatment." The warrior feels threatened and goes silent, just staring. Caesar tells him to remember that it's not shameful to trade a useless life for money. Trembling with fear but out of options, Lao Zheng turns toward the crystals. He extends his hand, trembling, trying to grab one, but ends up giving up. He lowers himself apologizing and shouts that he can't do it. He starts yelling that, to be honest, he lost a lot of money gambling and is only here to pay off his debts because he doesn't want to die. Caesar says they're useless, as expected. Lao Chen analyzes the situation and realizes Caesar is extremely strong, and not even at his peak could he come close to defeating him. He decides to call Caesar boss and says he mentioned earlier that Blood Oath was recruiting and asks if he's interested. Lao Chen points out that he's just a fire mage, but would like to join. Caesar asks his companion if he really said that, and the companion confirms. He tells the fire mage to come to him. Lao Chen kneels in front of him and begins to say that he's willing to sacrifice his life for, but before he can finish, he's struck in the face. Caesar yells, asking if he really thought he was someone important, and says he'd never let trash like him into the elite group, emphasizing that he's nothing but a useless traitor and would be sentenced to death either way. He's just doing this to add a bit more value to his death. Caesar keeps kicking Lao Chen, saying he can be as angry as he wants because he's not leaving alive, emphasizing that he'll turn all of them into corpses and have necromancers control them to collect the magic crystals. While all of this is happening, the protagonist arrives and quickly pulls his clone out. Caesar keeps shouting that they've all already died once, but for some, it's no big deal. Zhou Tong starts getting irritated with everything that's going on and yells, telling Caesar to shut. Ye arrives just in time and touches his shoulder, asking him not to be hasty. He takes the lead and asks their leader to leave everything to him, and in the meantime, just wait in the corner. He asks how dangerous collecting those crystals could really be. The other two group members walk up to the protagonist and ask what kind of trash would show up at a time like that. But Ye just ignores them, goes to the crystals, and picks one up. Everyone runs and hides, begging him to give a warning before grabbing one, because if he keeps doing that, he'll end up killing them all. The mage asks if no deadly trap works on that brat. The redhead questions whether it's possible that the trap becomes useless after being triggered once. The protagonist thinks that even if it's a deadly trap, if he has enough luck to meet the requirements, he won't die but might get injured. Or it might have no effect at all. He's gained so many attribute points that his luck must be at the threshold where nothing happens. He keeps collecting the crystals and receives some alerts that the trap wasn't activated. Caesar is impressed and says the trap is working normally, but the boy's luck is far above 60 points. The mage asks if it's possible for a level 1 collector to have over 60 luck, since in most class changes, luck doesn't increase by itself. Caesar says that if that's taken into account, there's only one possibility. The deadly trap failed. The redhead goes to a crystal, saying it's already happened twice and clearly must be that. So he decides to grab one and smugly says nothing happened. But in the next second, he's also hit by a laser blast and falls dead on the spot, leaving the mage stunned. Caesar says that, eliminating all other possibilities, the boy named Ye Qing has an abnormally high luck stat, and it may be a rare trait related to his class since, in the Abyss, it's more common for power attributes to increase. However, he wonders if the protagonist really spent all his growth potential on something as useless as luck. Ye thinks to himself that he didn't do any of that. He just distributed the points equally. Caesar says the original plan was to turn all of them into corpses he could use, but now he can change the plan because he only needs one corpse with high enough luck. As for the rest, he can discard the bodies. He calls the rest of the group and orders that none of them escape. Lao Zhang starts trembling, saying they're finished now because their opponents are qualified members of Blood Oath, so they're not capable of winning that fight. Lao Chen gets up all beaten and shouts that there's still time to run. He tries to escape with one of the crystals in his hand. The protagonist turns and asks why he's running because the numbers are on their side. The warrior calls the protagonist an idiot, saying they're still missing one. But he corrects him, saying they're not missing anyone. Suddenly, the mage asks his companion if he heard something, and looking up, sees that small spider-men were coming their way. The system announces that the summon is complete. The group shouts that there are monsters there. Zhou Tong starts to worry and says this is bad because now they have to worry not just about the enemies, but also the monsters. Ye says he picked up some spiders along the way, so those are on their side. The leader is confused, asking how he controls those spiders and since when he can do that. Ye begins using his ability to scan the enemies. The first is a level 20 enemy necromancer. The second is a level 17 enemy berserker. Then there are 2 level 18 enemy hunters and 1 level 19 enemy paladin. The protagonist thinks he can't be certain of the power gap between the humans and the monsters he summoned, but he doesn't think it will be a problem. However, when he tries to scan Caesar, his skill says it's not possible to identify and states that it can't analyze nearby human enemies of comparable power. Caesar starts speaking, saying he's impressed to discover the protagonist can control abyssal monsters and that apparently he picked up a few tricks from rummaging around. Ye thinks that, in that case, the guy's stats probably aren't much lower than his own and may even be higher. Caesar shouts that if they're not level 10 monsters or above, they're not even worth mentioning. He orders his group to take care of the monsters first, then eliminate everyone else, and tells them to be careful not to damage the crystals. The protagonist says the plan has changed a little. He looks at his group and tells them that if they don't want to die, they need to run immediately in the same direction as Lao Chen. The warrior is surprised and thinks he already knew the protagonist was an idiot, sacrificing himself like that to stop the enemy group. However, he thinks it's fine as long as he does it alone. Without thinking twice, he also turns and starts running away. Zhou Tong looks at Ye before leaving, but Ye says he's sure they each have their own reasons for exploring the abyss, so if he doesn't want to die, he'd better run. Zhou Tong says he'll never forget this sacrifice and also starts running. However, thanks to his luck being one, he ends up stepping on a trap and an avalanche of rocks comes their way. The warrior asks what he just did. Zhou Tong screams an apology, saying that ever since he entered the abyss, bad things have been happening one after another and he doesn't know why. Meanwhile, the battle between the two groups begins, and the paladin charges at one of the spiders, landing a direct hit. He says he's going to crush those bugs one hammer strike at a time. However, the spider manages to counterattack and spits web in the paladin's face, causing a distraction. When he finally looks forward, he sees the real demon approaching. He manages to defend himself and says the protagonist is an idiot for trying to take on a level 19 while being level 1. However, he realizes that this strength isn't normal and uses a shield strike to push the protagonist away. While in midair, he thinks his spiders are level 10, so they're good enough to scatter their forces, but against an organized group like Blood Oath, it's not enough. With a quick move, he turns and cuts both of the paladin's calves, who screams in pain. Seeing the opening, he charges in to finish the attack, but 2 shots come toward him. He notices and dodges easily, impressing both archers. One of them asks how a level 1 can dodge that attack. The other says he probably missed and tells him to adjust the speed and try again. The archer does that and fires, but Yes sees the arrow coming and slices it in half. The archer is even more impressed, saying that this time he blocked it. The protagonist ducks and uses the great flame explosion on the ground. The blast destroys the floor beneath the 2 archers, making them fall into a pit full of fire. They scream that the protagonist really is someone extraordinary. The enemy warrior gets ready to deliver a finishing blow to one of the spiders. He manages to defeat it, impressing the rest of the group. He looks at the 2 and charges. Zhou Tong begins to panic and says he didn't do anything. Lao Zhang doesn't hesitate and steps in front to protect him from the attack. Even angry, he says it's all the fault of their idiot leader that they couldn't escape. So if he doesn't want to die, he should get up and try to fight. The berserker prepares another blow. The warrior tries to defend, but the strength is unmatched. The hit is enough to shatter his shield and throw him away, smashing one of the rocks behind him. The warrior's sword falls in front of Zhou Tong, and the berserker starts approaching to deliver the final blow. Zhou Tong stands up, trembling in pain, and starts laughing, saying he shouldn't have come to the abyss. Either way, he's doomed to die. He yells that his debts will be paid when he dies, so it's nothing, and tells the berserker to get it over with already. The berserker charges in, but is paralyzed mid-run and shouts that he can't move. Looking back, he sees that Zhou Tong is the one doing it. The leader says that this time, the buff hit the right target, emphasizing that he used his immobilization technique and yells for Lao Zhang to make history. However, the warrior yells back, saying he's also immobilized and calls him an idiot. Ye looks back and thinks he's surrounded by idiots. The necromancer starts acting, saying that even if the protagonist has a powerful hidden skill, there's always a limit to one's powers. Also, he doesn't have the stamina for long battles. Ye thinks that casting continuous spells consumes a lot of mana. When he summoned the clones earlier, he lost a third of his total mana. Summoning the spiders also consumes mana. He takes one of the cups from his inventory and starts drinking. The necromancer asks what kind of drink that is. However, Ye says he doesn't care what he's saying because it's already too late to restore his mana. While summoning the dead, the necromancer yells that necromancer is a very powerful S-rank class. The creatures controlled by necromancers are practically immortal, as they won't disappear until the controller is killed. Ye asks if he's talking about body control, and now that his mana is full, starts using his skill, saying the dead should just rest in peace. Quickly, all the bodies start being recycled by his skill, and the necromancer is shocked, asking if that's some kind of evil technique, and where all the bodies went. Suddenly, Ye starts attacking with impressive speed and lands a direct hit on the necromancer, knocking him to Caesar's feet. Caesar turns and says to the protagonist that he really does have some interesting tricks, so it's no wonder he caught attention at the drink shop. Ye says that if Caesar had shared with everyone and let them go their separate ways, everything would have been fine. But he wants to trade human lives for crystals, and that's already an offense, especially calling them cannon fodder. Caesar asks what that has to do with anything, and questions if a protagonist can really stop being cannon fodder just because he has potential. He says that's a joke, because people who are trash will always be subordinates. He asks how long Ye will keep pretending to be a hero, and emphasizes that he's only saying this to remind them. They live in a world that devours people. Only the strong can keep standing. Suddenly, he hears someone screaming for their life, saying they're just a handyman. Looking to the side, he sees his berserker is about to take a hit. Caesar turns and says that, judging by the situation, it's impossible for all of them, the cannon fodder, to get out of the abyss while he's still there, and asks if that isn't obvious. Lao Zhang shouts, telling his leader to ignore that man, because the moment they rebelled, their chances of making it out alive vanished, and that's why they need to kill them in order to escape. Zhou Tong says he's a support, and it's impossible for him to defeat anyone alone. Caesar returns to speaking with Ye, emphasizing that only one group will leave alive from there, and asks if he knows which one. The protagonist crouches down and starts laughing, saying there's one thing he's sure of, and emphasizes that everyone has the right to enter and leave the abyss alive. He begins releasing his aura, preparing for battle. Caesar does the same, saying that unfortunately, Ye was too naive. Caesar manages to land a direct punch and sends the protagonist flying far away. He gets up thinking that Caesar's strength is truly impressive, and that he's definitely the strongest person the protagonist has seen so far. Suddenly, Ye is startled as Caesar charges at him like a madman. With a quick move, he manages to dodge the attack and gains a bit of distance. Caesar turns and says that to him, everything in front of him is just trash. Meanwhile, Lao Zheng yells to his teammate, asking why he's still hesitating. The berserker manages to break free and punches Zhou Tong in the face, saying he's too weak. The former team leader falls to the ground and, unable to react, just stares at his opponent. But before the worst happens, the warrior jumps in and grabs the berserker. He yells for his companion to do something. The berserker turns and lands a blow on Lao Zheng, cutting his chest. As he falls to the ground, he yells once again for Zhou Tong to do something. Then he raises his trembling hand and says that he's powerful because he's leader Zhou Tong. You remember that before entering the abyss, he told the protagonist they needed a leader for the cannon fodder team. And since he was a level 3 bard, maybe he was the perfect choice for that. With a trembling voice, he says he only thought he wouldn't have to kill monsters with his own hands if he was the leader. He kneels on the ground, saying maybe he wouldn't have to deal with these dangerous things, or reveal that he's a complete failure. He states that he's not truly powerful. In fact, he's really just a desperate noob. He lowers his head in front of his opponent, begging for his life. Zhou Tong starts remembering things he heard his whole life, as people criticized him, saying he was the only one in the team who wasn't helping with anything, but still gained experience by casting buffs. But then another team member said he couldn't even buff the right target and should be ashamed and leave the team. Until one night, while sitting alone in the plaza, Caesar appeared, asking what his class was. Zhou Tong explains that he's a level 3 bard. Caesar immediately smiled and told him to follow. The protagonist's fight was still raging, and he kept taking the worst of it, hit after hit. Caesar charges in, saying that was a technique from the martial artist Kang Longjin, which causes continuous physical damage to the targeted organ. And if Ye uses magic after the hit, the injury will worsen, possibly even causing death. Suddenly, Ye dodges the attack and Caesar keeps talking, saying that move is a signature combat skill that can cripple even a master of magic. The protagonist realizes his opponent is very fast and needs to create some distance. Caesar starts chasing him, asking if he really thinks he can escape. While trying to get away, Ye looks back and wonders if there's a blood loss debuff when using that skill because he really wants to see it. Thinking of debuffs, he turns to Zhou Tong but doesn't even get a chance to speak before getting hit. He's thrown in front of his leader. Still on the ground, the protagonist says it's useless to try to get rid of past weakness and incompetence by expecting charity from others. He emphasizes that he dreamed of having that kind of power more than any other man alive, and that also made him disappointed with his own incompetence, stating that he really is useless. Ye takes a deep breath and says that even so, he doesn't plan to run, because being weak isn't something he should fear. In truth, what he should fear is letting his heart become weak too. Zhou Tong begins to reflect after hearing those words. The protagonist was fighting a monster, but all the damage he tried to cause was 0, and every time he attacked, he shouted that he refused to accept it, until finally the system notified that he had landed a critical hit. 1 point of damage to the monster. The monster fell dead to the ground, and he was the only one left standing. The protagonist says he really succeeded when he gathered the courage to take the first step. He gets up and wipes his mouth, saying that's when he finally realized he had been preparing his whole life to become a king, even if he was just a useless garbage collector. Zhou Tong asks if he can become a king too, and holding his sword, he says that if he doesn't get stronger here and now, he'll die. Because compared to being ridiculed, it was better to hide and avoid fights. But now he wants to get stronger because he wants to become a strong person. The berserker starts laughing, saying that's a joke, because how could a mere level 3 support cut his level 17 armor? Confident in his power and defense, he says he'll stand still and let Zhou Tong try to cut him. However, Zhou Tong throws the sword aside, confusing his opponent. He grabs his microphone and starts singing the poem, Great Dispersion. Both the berserker and Caesar are shocked by what's happening. Caesar asks what's going on there. The protagonist starts smiling and says that's because he found the best support in the world. The system notifies that he has been struck by inspiration and the status has been obtained, granting a 15% boost. Defense increased by 15%, speed increased by 15%, resistance increased by 15%. Yi summons his blood nightmare. The little monster goes after the berserker, and as he looks back, he sees an image of the protagonist, but the blood nightmare quickly begins wrapping around his body. He starts losing balance while screaming for that thing to let him go. Zhou Tong can't believe the protagonist is that strong. He hears a noise, looks back, and realizes that now their fight is different. Ye is dodging all the attacks. While evading, he thinks that due to the abundance of magic, his body's regeneration speed is very fast. He activates Berserker mode, Carnage. The two clash on the first strike, but the protagonist's speed is very high and he manages to strike again before Caesar can do anything. However, one attack grazes him, and Caesar begins to question whether his armor is even working, as it was pierced by a ragged dagger. On the other side, the protagonist is also reflecting, since his Carnage skill, which ignores defense, was very effective in the attack. However, the blood loss debuff is still active. He jumps again to attack, thinking this fight must be resolved as soon as possible. Caesar looks at him and starts laughing, shouting that this is getting more and more interesting. He dodges the protagonist's attack and blocks the second one, saying that after 20 years of training, how could he lose to a kid like him in skill? Caesar punches Ye in the face, asking if he can feel the difference in strength between them. He points out that martial artists can advance in their upgrade path and change class to a Destruction King, based on strength, or to a Street Fighter, based on skills. The protagonist drops his dagger and goes in with his fists too. The two clash at the same time, creating massive pressure inside the abyss. Ye starts to worry a bit while Caesar continues acting like a madman, saying he really doesn't like those weak styles based on technique, and that's why he poured all his points into destructive power. He uses his skill, Instant Death, Heaven-Shattering Punch, and sends the protagonist flying, making him crash across the area and land on the other side with a massive impact. However, it wasn't enough to defeat him. He lands on his feet. Caesar states that the protagonist is extremely stupid for wanting to face instant death head-on. He asks if Yes still thinks he can lose to someone like him in terms of strength. The protagonist begins to get extremely angry. He grabs his clothes and tells the system to add all his free points to strength. Yes stands and rips his shirt. The system announces that 176 free points have been added to strength. Caesar asks what he's doing adding all that to strength. The protagonist thinks his strength stat has increased instantly and his muscle mass has changed a bit. Caesar, still thinking he's superior, charges in without fear. The protagonist prepares to strike, thinking that although he doesn't know the full impact of a martial artist's combat skills in terms of destructive power, pouring 300 free points all at once should be enough to land a single decisive blow. Once again they clash, but this time one side loses badly. Caesar's hand begins to twist and he's sent flying with a destroyed hand. He starts screaming, asking how a punch with no skill managed to do that to him. Zhou Tong watches that fight in shock, and the protagonist wastes no time and jumps, slamming his opponent deeper into the rocks. While grabbing Caesar's face, he says, there won't be time for him to be shocked because that fight needs to end immediately. Caesar starts to get scared and remembers someone saying that from today on he could join Caesar's cannon fodder team. 8 years ago, he was being told by someone to clean all the gear because there would be deeper dungeons to return to later. They emphasize that he had to clean well because the rule of the Lionheart Hunters was that the weak are only assigned to polish boots. And he also used to hear that if he wanted to become an official member, he had to prove himself. However, it seems he's destined to be cannon fodder for the rest of his life. In a battle against a giant beast, he thinks that if he can prove he's not incompetent, then he'll be able to rise from the ranks of rookies. He thinks he needs to prove it and charges forward, landing an extremely powerful blow on that massive beast. He looks at his hands and thinks it doesn't seem so hard. He manages to bring the monster down but lets his guard down and the monster strikes back, slamming him into the ground. In the infirmary, a doctor says his jaw was crushed, 8 ribs were broken, his heart was pierced, his liver, spleen, and kidneys were all damaged. He highlights that the entire setup inside his body cost many magic crystals, since abyssal technology can now extract high-value cells from abyssal creatures and transplant them into human bodies. The doctor notes that, coincidentally, Caesar's DNA matched the monster's, and the good news is that he'll live. The bad news is he'll become a hybrid. Sometime later, he receives the news that he has successfully proven himself worthy of joining the Lionhearts. As an official member, a shield is thrown on the ground, and a strange being tells him to wear it and become its extra arm, becoming its dog. Caesar picks up the shield and smiles, asking where his friends are. The strange being responds that those useless people are all dead. He thinks that this is a world that swallows people whole, and if you can't prove your worth, you'll be treated like trash. Suddenly, he rises and enters the unshakable mode. This skill boosts defense, destructive power, and speed. He manages to grab the protagonist's arm, surprising him. Looking at Caesar's hand, he notices it's also been restored. Fueled by rage, he lands a direct punch on Ye's face, pushing him back slightly. Caesar says that the essence of magic crystals is solidified energy and magical fury. During the blood moon, these crystals are especially powerful. He notes that because of the monster organs transplanted in him, he can also absorb the power of magic crystals. He consumes the crystals, saying he can gain power that exceeds Abyss boss level temporarily. His body begins to mutate and the system alerts that a boss has been detected. Rodrigo Caesar has appeared. On the other hand, the system also alerts Ye that his berserker mode has ended and he's now entering an exhaustion state for 30 seconds. The protagonist starts brushing himself off and says his opponent has truly been recognized as a boss by the system. He starts wondering what happened to that guy's body. Caesar continues radiating more and more power, and says all he needs to do is give up human dignity. Ye looks at Zhou Tong and gets an idea. Caesar starts attacking, kicking several rocks toward them, saying they should just give up their human bodies and become monsters with no moral restraint. The two begin dodging the rocks being hurled, and Caesar charges at the protagonist, saying he accepts the price of that power. As he runs, he looks back and sees Caesar closing in more and more. Even Zhou Tong, who was a bit farther away, begins to tremble at the overwhelming aura. He stares at that monster in front of him and thinks that without a doubt, they, the trash, don't have the power to fight against truly powerful players. However, Ye Qing, the name of that person with hidden strength, is already far better than his teammates, and even so, he's no match for that thing and could be killed with a single punch. Zhou Tong keeps thinking that even though he's exhausted all his strength, he still activated that unshakable power. His body just reacted instinctively. Caesar starts laughing hard and says the weak tremble before the strong. That's an unchanging truth. He keeps laughing and says that to be strong, you must show that ugly face. Suddenly, he turns and says he almost forgot something. Zhou Tong tries to cover it up, saying he swears he didn't see anything about him being ugly. Caesar says it doesn't matter because he messed up the crystal collection mission anyway, and he's the last cannon fodder to witness this tragedy. Caesar begins screaming that he'll give him a heroic death. However, Zhou Tong pleads for a moment and says that if he has no choice but to die, then he'd like to say one last thing. Caesar grabs his neck, saying he talks too much, and asks what his final words are. Behind them, the body Caesar had defeated, the protagonist, starts to dissolve, revealing it was the blood nightmare. Zhou Tong says his last words are that he wants to leave the abyss alive, and that maybe he's not the only cannon fodder to witness this tragedy. Caesar is confused and turns, seeing blood bubbles forming. The protagonist appears among them, saying that thanks to the bard he gained a little more time. The exhaustion state was cancelled by that drink. Ye grabs the blood nightmare in his hand and emphasizes that it was impossible to get a read on his opponent's body by relying only on his observer's eye. So he had to rely on the blood nightmare's traits to gather hidden information by making contact with the Caesar's body. The Abyss boss is a bit confused and starts questioning if that thing he tried to kill was just a clone. He asks, "Since when has this been happening?" The protagonist says that the price of these superhuman powers may be heavier than it seems. Although the Berserker combat skills increased his strength in a short time, the price of forcibly relying on that power beyond his physical limits was 30 seconds of exhaustion. However, since Caesar has a body that blurs the lines between humans and monsters and he stretched his greedy hands toward the Abyss itself, then the Abyss will naturally want him to pay the price. Caesar gets angry, telling the protagonist not to joke about it and asks, if that power is his own, what does the Abyss have to do with anything? Suddenly, he feels something strange in his arm and upon looking, realizes it's taking on a monstrous form and begins to scream in pain. His arm starts growing, becoming more monstrous. Caesar looks at Ye and thinks he's the one doing it. He charges forward, but the protagonist is extremely fast and easily dodges the attack. Caesar keeps trying to attack, but Ye thinks that the change in his opponent's body shape slowed him down and now it's way too easy. He keeps dodging with ease and thinks that if he had a weapon now, everything would end faster. Zhou Tong acts quickly, passes behind the protagonist and shouts. As Ye turns, he throws a dagger, asking him to catch it. The protagonist grips it firmly and tries to create some space, but Caesar continues charging without hesitation. Seeing a small opening, the protagonist blocks and with a quick move, manages to get behind Caesar and stab him with the dagger. Caesar starts feeling unbearable pain and asks if every strike is a critical. The protagonist just watches and asks Caesar not to forget that he's just a guy who doesn't bother anyone. He just put a few points in agility. Caesar starts getting furious and charges in, shouting that humiliating him will only make the protagonist's death worse because he is of a superior existence. Ye dodges again and says Caesar isn't anything special. Landing a punch imbued with flames, he states that in his eyes, Caesar is 100% a monster. As Caesar catches fire and screams in pain, he grows even more enraged and loses complete control of his body, transforming fully into a monster. Seeing this transformation, Ye says that unfortunately, Caesar is already gone. There's no saving him now. He's completely transformed. A strange aura begins to surround them, and the protagonist asks if he's beginning to hear the Abyss's call. Caesar gets a bad feeling, but keeps screaming that the protagonist should just die and not drag him along. Suddenly, he starts swinging at the air, screaming that he already proved his worth, so why can't he leave? He says he's not cannon fodder and doesn't want to die, and keeps yelling while trying to hit nothing. Zhou Tong says that man has gone completely insane and that now's their chance. A few minutes earlier, Caesar was laughing, thinking he had won the fight. However, Ye appears behind his leader and calls him, saying his body is being swapped by the blood nightmare. Zhou Tong breathes a bit easier, saying that for a moment he thought Ye had died. The system notifies that a challenge has been activated. Win the battle without killing Caesar and earn rewards. The moment he reads it, he starts wondering how that'll be possible because Caesar won't walk out alive, and his companions wouldn't let him go that easily if they saw him like this. However, he thinks that if he completes the challenge, he'll get some rare rewards, so he'll at least try. While turning into the blood nightmare, the protagonist asks his leader to remember his words, because he needs to find a way to snap that madman out of it. 5 seconds would be enough. Back to the present, Ye says there's no need to finish that man off. Jo Tong asks what kind of madness he's talking about. Ye explains that monsters belong to the abyss and, therefore, cannot leave it. Those who abandon humanity and fall into the abyss are welcomed with open arms. That's the law of the abyss. He notes that he heard monsters go into berserker state during the blood moon, but unfortunately, during this blood moon, the one who gave into madness was a person. Caesar starts walking through the abyss. Meanwhile, Lao Chen keeps shouting that everything is a mess and that he'll be lucky if he survives this. However, he feels confident, saying that this time it's finally his turn to strike it rich. He manages to open the chest and shouts that it's full of treasure. Happy about it, he says he's finally rich and now has freedom, equipment, and a new identity. Caesar appears behind him as a monster while he keeps laughing, saying it's amazing and telling fate to screw itself. Later, outside the abyss, Jo Tong bows, banging his head on the table in respect, and asks the protagonist to let him call him boss, emphasizing that he'll follow him forever. Ye says he can't accept something like that. Jo Tong emphasizes that he spent his whole life preparing to turn things around, and ever since he heard that phrase, he's been determined. He chose to follow the protagonist everywhere. Ye takes a deep breath and says he was just trying to sound cool at the time and that looking back now, he was talking a bunch of nonsense. Jo Tong scolds him and says that's not it, because it was only with his encouragement that he discovered his own value and the goals he's aiming for. Ye asks what his plans are for the future. Jo Tong says the protagonist said he was the best support. Ye asks when he ever said that. Jo Tong, determined, says he wants to become the king of supports. The protagonist thinks that a guy with agility 2 and luck 1 is impressive for still having a place on the battlefield. Ye understands that if he keeps encouraging that young man to fight on the front lines, he'll end up hurting him. Jo Tong remains extremely enthusiastic. He asks the protagonist to imagine the following scene. Ye in front, fighting, while he provides support from behind. That way, they'd make a great team. However, the protagonist says he doesn't recommend he keep going into the abyss. Jo Tong gets a reality check and asks what his boss means by that. The protagonist thinks that if his only skill is making others stronger, but he's so weak he needs protection himself, then that's not a qualified support. He thinks he just doesn't want Jo Tong to keep risking his life. Ye holds out his hand to Jo Tong and transfers 1,000 magic crystals to him. The protagonist says that's all the magic crystals he has so far and that it's enough to support him for a long time. However, he wants Jo Tong to promise he won't set foot in an abyss again. Jo Tong gets a little emotional and lowers his gaze. However, he says he understands, and that this is a truth his boss told him for his own good. But then he raises his head again and says, unfortunately, he can't accept that at all because he can't go on living in that world as trash, and even if he dies, he doesn't want people to look down on him. Ye starts to smile and thinks that expression is very convincing, one that no one can refuse. He asks Jo Tong how he's going to protect others if he can't even protect himself. He starts picking up a sword and says he remembers well. Jo Tong's microphone only occupies one hand. Jo Tong realizes that's Lao Zhang's sword. The protagonist climbs on the table and sticks the sword into it, saying that according to the information he has about bards, it's a half magic, half physical class. That means Jo Tong can use magic weapons to cast buff and debuff spells, which he's already good at, and can also master certain attack effects. Ye keeps talking and emphasizes that if he couldn't wield a sword for Lao Zhang before, then he must try his best from now on. This is a favor he must repay to Lao Zhang. Jo Tong holds the sword and tells his boss he doesn't need those magic crystals. The protagonist says if that's the case, then Jo Tong should give all the crystals to the families of Lao Zhang and Lao Zhu, because in the future, they'll earn much more than that. Jo Tong remains excited and takes the sword for himself, saying yes. Meanwhile, at the entrance of another abyss, 3 people are waiting outside. A woman comes out of the abyss and says that after the Red Moon incident, several Class S teams were sent to deal with the abyss monsters. And in the depths of the abyss, they found 8 bodies, identified as members of the Blood Oath. The body of Caesar, their leader, had transformed into a monster due to abyss corruption and was properly eliminated. They also found other bodies with an identifier. The man sitting asks who those people are. The woman hands him the report, saying one of them has always been accused of being a team killer during abyss invasions. His name is Lao Chen. She notes that high-quality equipment was discovered near his body and that he probably found the mutated corpse of the former team leader and died in combat. She highlights that this is an unexpected factor, but still within their calculations. The man sitting asks if that's really the only factor. The woman says yes and emphasizes it must be just him. The guy says he understands. Another man standing beside him asks if that means their plan was a failure. The man sitting replies that Caesar was just a small fry who failed to prove his worth, so they can always find others like him. The next day, at the People's Hospital of Shenfeng, some people are walking normally through the hospital visiting patients. However, inside a room with the door closed, a man is completely broken down. Sitting on the floor, crying in despair, he begs forgiveness from his son, saying he had no choice, but he'll have to do it again. With the key in hand, he begins to use it, and an immense amount of strange energy starts being released. Quickly, this energy expands and begins flowing out of the hospital, reaching the street and destroying everything around. The people walking nearby start panicking, asking what's happening, until suddenly a gigantic portal begins to form. They shout for someone to call and notify the authorities immediately. The city begins being attacked and destroyed by monsters. Two people hold hands, and the older brother tells his sister to hang in there and hold on tight without looking back. He starts pulling her, telling Joe to run as fast as she can. However, the monster attacks them both, throwing the brother away and separating them. She starts being devoured by the monster while screaming for her brother. The protagonist wakes up startled and looks around, trying to calm down. He lies back down because he's had that dream many times before. He grabs his phone and says he almost forgot about today. He goes to a flower shop and asks Lady Zhang for a bouquet as always. She's happy to see him and asks if he's going to visit his little sister. He says yes and emphasizes that, unfortunately, they had an incident. Zhang smiles and says his sister is extremely lucky to have him as a brother. She asks if he cut his hair and notes that it looks very good. Ye explains that on the way he was stopped by the military fanatic old man. He takes the chance, goes over to some flowers, and tells Zhang that he imagines she'll put those flowers out too, so he'll help her. She smiles and thanks him for his kindness. Outside, they see several police trucks passing at high speed. She comments that she's been seeing a lot of vehicles going to the hospital lately and that apparently they all seem to belong to explorers. She asks if something's going on. As soon as the protagonist hears the word hospital, he activates his power and immediately leaps, using all his speed to get there as fast as possible. Still in the air, he sees that a massive portal had formed. The police were shouting for all barriers to be opened immediately. Ye is shocked, wondering what an abyss portal is doing there. He goes to the authorities, but one of the guards says that civilians need to keep their distance because the area is under lockdown. However, the guard is surprised because the protagonist completely ignores him and keeps walking toward the abyss entrance. Another officer arrives and asks what kind of joke is going on there and why the guard is letting just anyone pass like that. The guard replies that her supervisor shouldn't ask him that because that guy and the people who came before him are folks they should never mess with. The protagonist keeps heading into the portal angry and says his sister must wait for him because this time he won't fail. As soon as he arrives on the other side, he says the abyssification happened because the hospital was transported to another dimension, and the space there is far larger than the previous hospital. He wonders if the same thing that happened at the mall is happening again. Ye looks around and notices that the room has already been cleared, probably the work of the team that came before him. He finds an empty bottle on the floor and comments that the people who came earlier are doing well financially too, because that bottle isn't something someone with a common class could afford. The protagonist asks for his skill to retrieve the effective magic bottle. The bottle appears full in front of him, and the system explains that the effective magic bottle restores 85% MP, removes fatigue, and halves consumption for the next 30 seconds. He stores that small bottle and says that even if he faces the abyss alone to find his sister, the magic consumption will be heavy, so he must be as prepared as possible. He keeps walking until he reaches a fork. He uses his exploration vision skill. The system gives a hint, saying that both paths lead to a point of no return. He comments that it looks like he needs to choose a direction. Looking at the ground, he notices that the previous group left some markings there, and they seem pretty recent, so they were probably left by the hunting team that came before him. He assumes they're there for a rescue mission, so he decides to take the other route to increase the chances of finding his sister. He grabs a torch and looks into the darkness, saying he doesn't know how long he'll be in there, so in the worst case, he'll have to worry about the entire place. He starts getting even more irritated and pushes himself, saying he doesn't have time to wait around because a normal person can't survive long in a place like that, so he needs to hurry. Ye starts moving quickly through the place, and when he steps on a carpet, he notices the red carpet is new, which indicates that place has never been seen before. Looking back, the protagonist notices that the path behind him has been swallowed by darkness, creating a barrier that prevents him from returning. He picks up an item and says he's seen that item's ability before and that if he's stuck in the labyrinth, he can mark parts of the area on the map. The system announces that he used the Eye of Argos, and asked to open the map. However, the system notifies that it's impossible to show the map outside that area. Yes says it's no wonder the others use blades to mark locations in that abyss labyrinth. The system's orientation is completely ineffective. That must be one of the so-called rules of the abyss. He hears a noise behind him and, turning around, realizes something strange is emerging from nowhere, making him wonder if that place is a trap. However, he quickly dismisses that possibility because he didn't hear any mechanism moving. He also notes that there's something strange because that room is too quiet. Suddenly, a monster starts to form behind him and gets ready to attack, but he senses its presence and dodges the attack with a quick movement. He prepares and counterattacks the monster, slicing it in half. The system announces that it's ineffective, and the monster begins to regenerate. He starts to wonder if that monster is immune to physical damage. The monster roars. The sound is so loud it makes the protagonist bleed from his eyes, mouth, nose, and ears. The system announces that he is now under the deafness status. He thinks that now he won't be able to hear with his ears, which will drastically reduce his perception. He thinks he completely underestimated the danger of that abyss, and that what he's facing there is a rule-type monster. He remembers encountering one of those 3 years ago. While lying on the ground collecting magic crystals, he notices something ahead of him. But when he looks closely, he sees they were just some statues and comments that he got really scared, but that there's nothing to worry about. He turns and goes back to collecting the magic crystals. The statues begin to stare at him and move closer while he's focused only on the crystals. As soon as he looks back again, he's startled to see the statues are already very close to him. He asks if it's possible that he's hallucinating since those statues were on top of that rock mound just seconds ago. Suddenly, another collector appears beside him, shouting that he can't turn his back to the statues and that he mustn't blink because those are monsters, weeping stone statues. He asks what that is, because just hearing the name gives him chills. The man shouts at him again, saying he mustn't take his eyes off them, and begs him to keep looking at the statues. The guy starts to explain that the monsters in that abyss follow certain rules, and that's logical. The higher the monster's level, the stronger the logic. The weeping stone statues in front of him are Class S creatures, but they usually don't attack awakened ones. However, their rule is that once you start looking at them, the bodies petrify like statues and lock onto you. As soon as you look away, they rush at you at a speed fast enough to kill most awakened ones instantly. The protagonist asks what they should do now. The man comes over to him and asks him to follow his lead. He explains that they should retreat slowly until they're out of the room and mustn't blink. The two begin walking backward, watching the statues, until they manage to leave the area. However, the protagonist trips on something and falls to the ground, scattering all the magic crystals. As a result, both of them look away, and the statues charge. The man runs, pulls a lever, and quickly closes the room's entrance. Ye, shaken, falls to the ground relieved and thanks the man, saying it's thanks to him that he made it out alive. The man keeps laughing and says the protagonist got lucky this time because if he had attacked a weeping stone statue like other awakened ones, besides realizing he couldn't deal any damage, he would have been killed in the blink of an eye. The guy keeps laughing and comments that although they're just collectors with little combat ability, when it comes to experience, the protagonist rushes at the monster using his magical skills, thinking they're not worse than the other awakened ones. He keeps moving forward, saying that if that monster in front of him has a physical immunity rule, then maybe magic attacks are its weakness. He uses the Great Flame Burst. However, he starts to feel something strange in his hand and quickly cancels the flames he was creating, shouting that it was too hot. He pulls back, asking if fire control can't be used normally. He starts blowing on his hand, saying that it's really a shame because the fire attack is the only magic attack he can master. The monster prepares to attack him, and he remembers that he still has one card left. He manages to dodge and says that the whereabouts of the ship still haven't been found, so he won't just stand in that first room without moving forward. The demonic spirit has physical immunity, but its attacks are mostly physical. That rule-type abomination is kind of strange. The monster charges at him again, but the protagonist manages to dodge. The monster gives no space and keeps attacking, pressing Ye to the limit. The protagonist says he knows he can successfully push that monster back. After dodging several strikes, he thinks he finally understands the rules and mechanisms, because the demonic spirit only materializes when an attack action is executed. The scythe hasn't been pulled out, and now he not only lost the protection of the rules that made physical attacks ineffective, but also turned physical attacks into its biggest weakness. Taking advantage of an opening in the middle of the opponent's attack, the protagonist moves in and lands multiple slashes all at once, causing the monster to vanish. The monster's energy, which was scattered around, begins to concentrate into a single point, and another monster appears before the protagonist. He observes it and thinks that a second form has appeared, and that's really interesting. However, this second form has an energy pressure far greater than the first. That aura begins to surround Ye, and he thinks that ever since he heard the scream from the first form, not only has his hearing stopped working properly, but now his vision is also starting to be affected. This makes him wonder if he should use his blood plan to try to save himself, but he dismisses that idea too, because he just used it to lure the first form's attack, creating an opening for the counterattack. Besides, his skill requires at least 30 seconds of cooldown, and his remaining magical power wouldn't support the cost of continuous summoning. The second form attacks him with everything, and he realizes he's been slashed on the shoulders. The protagonist thinks there's no way to react. The best he can do is avoid fatal blows with luck. He thinks he's just encountered an assassin he couldn't beat even with all his stacked stats. He activates his carnivorous plant card, Regeneration. The system notifies that all wounds have been successfully healed, including the abnormal deafness. He thinks he needs to increase his health so he doesn't die from a single blow. The second form observes the situation, and it surprises it. The protagonist says that the demonic spirit, in its second form, is afraid of luminous things. Even the faint light from the healing magic makes it back off. Determined, Ye begins to smile and ignites flames in his hands again. The second form hesitates, and the protagonist intensifies the flames, spreading them over his whole body. He starts to catch fire, but that prevents the second form from coming at him. The system warns that he's burning, but he He keeps laughing and says, things are finally getting interesting. He begins to run toward the second form, which, terrified, runs from him as much as it can. He keeps running, saying that the demonic spirit fears flames because flames are its life force. It's just an innocent soul that died in a fire. However, fire element abilities were cursed, becoming unusable. So, if he can't launch a fireball, he activates his spirit charge, saying that he himself will become the fireball. With the spirit charge, he manages to reach the second form and uses the great flame explosion on his own body, causing a massive blast. He's thrown far away while the evil spirit catches fire. The system reports that he has successfully defeated the evil spirit, however. His health is below 1/10. Additionally, the system also says his arm is severely burned, and he cannot wield weapons or cast spells. Ye starts laughing, saying that the price of that victory was a bit high, and that now he needs to wait until the regeneration skill finishes its cooldown. He looks at the second form, shouting, and says it can't burn to ashes because he still needs to recycle it. He uses his skill and commands it to recycle immediately. With that, he manages to obtain a Soul Reaper artifact. With it, it's possible to summon the demonic spirit to advance and unleash a wide-scale harvest with the scythe, dealing 5 times the base damage. If any target dies due to this ability, Despair Harvest will be activated immediately, restoring 5% of the user's health and mana. If Despair Harvest is triggered more than 5 times at once, then he will enter an incorporeal state for 1 second. In the incorporeal state, he will be immune to physical attacks and obstacles. His attack will not cause death, or the user will suffer backlash equal to the damage dealt. Artifacts cannot be equipped, as they are bound to the user's soul and cannot be swapped. The protagonist stares at the card and says that the cards he got this time are different, as it's the first time he's seen a soul-bound artifact card. Ye says that the Soul Harvest Blade seems capable of converting the dead target into human health. If summoned inside a large group of soldiers, it can wipe out the entire group in a single move. However, the cost of using the artifact is that if the attack doesn't kill the target, he will suffer the backlash of the damage dealt or even die suddenly. So, he must use it at exactly the right moment. The protagonist looks to the side and sees that the door that was previously locked has now opened. The system also notifies that the regeneration cooldown has ended. Immediately, he begins healing and asks his sister to hold on just a little longer because he's coming. In another room, something terrible was happening. A butcher was doing his work and throwing something into a bucket. Xiaozhou gets up with a bottle in her hand. She throws the bottle far away, causing noise. The monster that was near her looks to see where the noise came from. She uses this moment to get out of the pile of trash but falls clumsily to the ground. She looks ahead and sees the doll her brother gave her. Even without strength, she struggles to grab that doll, saying she will never let them hurt him. However, the doll is crushed right in front of her. As she looks up, she sees that the monster from earlier has already returned. It starts screaming loudly, making her so afraid that she can barely move. She just calls for help from her older brother. The monster prepares to attack and suddenly someone appears, slicing the monster in half. Xiaozhou is shocked by the strength of that attack. The man in front of her is a warrior swordsman known as Wu Ming. Still shaken by that strike, she says he's a hunter, but the man simply turns around. She tries to call him, but he just keeps walking. She runs and grabs his legs, screaming and begging Ming to take her with him. The warrior turns and says there are no more monsters there, so she should just hide because if she follows him, she will certainly die. Xiaozhou thinks about her brother and says she has to stay alive until she sees him one more time because of the promise from 7 years ago. Ye was sitting with his sister's doctor. He says her spinal nerves were badly damaged and therefore fears she may never be able to walk again. The doctor emphasizes that it's a miracle she can still move her upper body. The protagonist asks if that means she really won't be able to stand again. The doctor says that's exactly it, as spinal nerve damage is theoretically irreversible. At least theoretically. Ye asks why he says theoretically, and, thanks to that word, becomes filled with hope, saying that means there's still a chance. He asks what needs to be done. The doctor takes a deep breath and says that theoretically science can't do anything. But he's heard of cases where blind people recovered their sight inside the abyss. Because in recent worlds, there may be a way to heal his sister in a way that science still can't, with any tool. That mysterious power can't be explained by any science. And if his sister's condition was caused by a monster in the abyss, then the solution might also be in there. Ye starts looking at his hand and says that if the cure may be in the abyss, that means if he can enter the abyss, then he might be able to cure his sister. The doctor puts a hand on his head and tries to explain that only researchers can go in there, and someone like him entering would only be committing suicide. The doctor tries to say that instead of worrying about that, he should worry about the problem in front of him, and says that even the hospital's routine treatment costs an arm and a leg. The daily treatment is at least 8,000 won. The protagonist, without hesitation, bows to the doctor and promises to do his best to gather money, asking him to take care of his little sister. The doctor says he'll do everything possible to keep her healthy and safe. However, the hospital bills must be paid on time. Ye starts walking away, saying he understood, and emphasizes that he'll gather the full amount as soon as possible. While walking down the hallway, the nurses start whispering, asking if they were talking about that boy, because his parents died that day and his sister became disabled. He's the only one left. They begin to say they feel sorry seeing such a little boy in that situation. With tears streaming down his face, he reaches his sister's hospital room door. Before entering, he puts a smile on his face, wipes his tears, and, as he opens the door, tries to look as cheerful as possible, shouting that he's back. Xiaoju, worried, looks at him and asks where he had gone. He jumps onto her bed and says he was talking to the doctor. All happy, he tells her he's going to a place called the Abyss. His little sister, not knowing much about the world, asks what the Abyss is and whether it's safe there. The protagonist keeps smiling and says yes, emphasizing that it's not dangerous, and he just needs to stay behind other people. She just listens quietly. Then, Ye gets up and starts to leave, but before leaving the room, he says he almost forgot. Suddenly, he turns and shows her a teddy bear. He says he won't be able to show up for a while, so while he's gone, that teddy bear will take care of her for him. Xiaoju gets worried and says that he's her only family and she doesn't want him to put himself in danger again. She asks him not to go anywhere that has monsters. Ye approaches his sister, still smiling, and says, "There's no way around it. He found a job that will pay very well, and then they'll be able to treat her legs. And as long as she waits just a little longer, she'll be able to walk again." Xiaoju says that if her brother has to go to dangerous places for that, then she'd rather stay in a wheelchair for the rest of her life because she doesn't want him to go to where the monsters are. She says this is a pinky promise. Ye also hooks his pinky and promises not to put himself in danger. Back to the present, she keeps clinging to the hunter's legs and says that if she stays in the abyss, then her brother will find a way to come too, and she doesn't want him to risk himself for her again. That's why she can't die there. And besides that, she doesn't want her brother to die either. Ming keeps looking at her and says that apparently she's very stubborn. He picks her up and places her in a wheelchair, saying that's actually interesting. However, if a monster tries to attack her, he won't protect her. She manages to recover the teddy bear her brother had given her and is happy her chair is intact. The hunter turns to her and says she's not his employer, so whether she lives or dies isn't his concern. She says that's fine and asks him to just do his job, while she watches from a distance and won't get in the way. He introduces himself to her, saying his name is Wu Ming and that he's a warrior swordsman. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the abyss, the protagonist was walking and says that although he worked as a scavenger for a while, he saw many potions capable of healing wounds that could only heal those caused by monsters, with just a few exceptions. One of the rules of the abyss is that you can't heal injuries that were already there before the person entered. So, if a person has burns before entering and gets injured by a monster, they'll be healed to the state they entered in. If the burns happened outside the abyss, they can't be healed inside. If not for that, he would already have a cure for his sister. Suddenly, he's surprised to see several bodies on the ground. He comments that apparently a nasty battle happened there, and the monsters were higher level than the hunters, so he's not surprised. He keeps looking around and sees that there are no monsters nearby, so probably someone survived. But he's surprised once again because when he looks to the side, he sees a giant guy who was sliced clean in half, and his observation skill doesn't detect any human signal from there. Most of the victims were awakened of the agile or intelligent type. He wonders if that blow was really done with brute strength alone. He starts to smile and gets excited, saying that apparently someone stronger than everyone else exists there. And to be more specific, this guy is an overwhelmingly powerful existence. Ming keeps walking while Xiaoju follows him. Suddenly he steps on a trap and she gets scared. Some lights begin to appear on the ceiling and strike the hunter's body, making her panic and start screaming. However, the hunter remains standing as if nothing happened, and his wounds start closing immediately. She asks if they should really keep doing this and says it hurt too. Ming doesn't understand what she's talking about. 4 years ago in the ancient tomb of the abyss, the boss-level king was defeating every hunter who approached him like it was nothing. Ming was one of the hunters who entered to face him. He remembers an old man yelling at him and his group, saying he paid a fortune for nothing, that they were mercenaries and should do anything for money. The old man pointed at them, shouting that they should never forget he could buy their lives twice over. Ming thinks he's a criminal, and having no legal support, could only join private hunting parties as a mercenary. And among those crazy groups, there were some truly indifferent to life and death. They took on virtually suicidal missions and charged double for it. That old man shouted he'd give 100,000 points to whoever killed the overlord. He kept insisting that the person would get everything because he couldn't lose that treasure. The man got so desperate that within seconds he changed again and said he'd give 200,000 points to anyone who could do it. Sword warriors who gamble everything for money, like someone at a casino. The mercenaries started negotiating, saying they'd do it for 250,000. The old man agreed and promised to pay 250,000 to anyone who killed that thing in the abyss. The overlord finally appeared and with a terrifying roar began summoning his minions. The old man shouted again, saying he'd pay, so they had to kill it for him. One of the warriors shouted and two decided to attack at once, but were instantly destroyed in milliseconds. Ming also tried something, but took a direct hit and was sent flying. The overlord turned and looked at the old man. He started panicking and begged to be saved, shouting that they'd only get paid if he got out alive, and reminding them he bought all their lives. Ming started getting up and charged at the monster with everything he had. Catching it off guard, he managed to land a direct hit. The monster vanished, and a chest along with a gem appeared in its place. The old man shoved the warrior aside, yelling at him to move because he wanted to open the chest immediately. Ming got up, badly injured, and said the pay was double. The old man laughed, saying he was practically dead anyway. So what did he need money for? Was he going to spend it in the afterlife? He opened the chest laughing, saying he'd be rich, that he hadn't wasted money on hidden abyss info for nothing. As he opened the box, a strange light emerged, and he was shocked to see it empty. He kept screaming, saying he worked so hard to get there, but something started happening to him. His head began to swell. That was the sand curse. The sword warrior wondered if it was cursed. He noticed some sand leaking from his own eye and questioned if he'd also been affected. In front of him was the corpse king's jewel, and whether it could be used or not depended only on him. He picked up the immortal relic, a soul-bound artifact that transforms the bearer into an undead creature. Holy and healing spells deal fatal damage to the user. Ordinary damage doesn't hurt the undead. The cost of the transformation is the loss of pain and all other emotions. Ming thought he became someone who couldn't die. After telling all this to Xiaoju, she asked if his blood was actually sand and what kind of curse it was. Ming just ignored the question and turned away. She yelled not to be ignored like that. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the chaos was on. Countless monsters gathered and charged. Ye began walking toward them, defeating one after another. He thought he had rushed too much and hadn't distributed his points carefully, so he ended up spreading them evenly. Now all his stats were over 200. Even so, before entering the next room, he had no idea what awaited inside, and going in without thinking might land him in a tight spot. Although abyss monsters weren't that strong, the endless battles were exhausting. He kept moving forward nonstop, defeating everything in his way. He leapt, looked at the remaining monsters, and used Dagger Frenzy. The system warned him his mana was below 5%. That worried him. He couldn't use any spells or skills anymore. One monster noticed a small opening and charged, but Ye was alert and said he'd have to rely on fists now. With absurd strength, he crushed the monster's head. Looking back, he saw more monsters coming. Frustrated, he shouted that it never ends. After fighting through 4 rooms in a row, his body was worn out and mana was barely at half. The small mana potions in his bag were nearly all used. Only the large ones he found at the start of the abyss remained. He rushed toward the monsters, thinking he'd only use the large mana pots if things got truly dire. He kept defeating monsters with brute force like a beast. He used his artifact card, Soul Reaper. While using it, he thought that due to its big side effects, he wouldn't use that scythe for just anything. But if he faced a beast on the brink of death, the Despair Harvest effect could activate and restore his life. The Reaper swept through the monsters, obliterating them, and the system said the Soul Reaper artifact activated its effect. Life and mana fully restored. Now he had 100% life and mana. He sighed in relief, saying he managed to save the mana potions and reduce his use of super regeneration. The system also notified that cooldown times increase the more a skill is used. While walking, he stepped on something that made a sound. Looking down, he saw a pair of glasses and noticed someone hiding in a barrel. He turned and asked who was there. The barrel tipped over and the person inside screamed, begging him to wait and not attack, claiming to be human too. A man crawled out and asked if the protagonist had seen his glasses. Ye picked them up and handed them to the man, who introduced himself as doctor and researcher Song Qingshan. The doctor said he didn't know exactly what happened, but earlier several monsters showed up where he was, the same ones Ye had just killed. He said he was so terrified he only thought about running and ended up in that weird room with no choice but to hide in the barrel. Ye asked if he knew of any other survivors. Qingshan said that was impossible since it was a hospital, and if people with all limbs intact couldn't survive, let alone those sick or missing parts. Ye got furious and grabbed the doctor by the collar, asking how he could say things like sick or missing parts. If he really was a doctor, he shouldn't speak like that. Qingshan asked why not and said he was a doctor, not a hero, and couldn't fight those monsters. He asked if Ye understood. He added that even when rescuing others, one's own life must come first. If he were strong, he wouldn't have been hiding in a barrel. Then asked if Ye came to save him. If he was paid to, he shouldn't be talking crap. Lionheart must have offered a massive reward if he got him out. Ye remembered that name and thought of the Emperor. A few days ago, when he defeated the Emperor, a small shield had dropped and he got 150 points. Ye had asked Zhou Tong what that guy just dropped. Zhou Tong said he'd seen it before and thought it was the Lionheart Hunter's emblem. Ye said that was the group of super hunters who only accept the strongest, with entry requirements so absurd they were nearly impossible. Back to the present, Ye just turned away and ignored the doctor. Qingshan yelled at him, saying he just came from that direction, so the exit had to be the other way. Ye said the doctor came from the infirmary, but Qingshan didn't understand and asked what that had to do with anything. He said Ye shouldn't care about saving those weirdos since they're all trouble and wouldn't be able to pay for a rescue. Ye said sadly that he was sorry, but his sister was there. When the doctor heard that, he realized Ye wasn't there to save him and wasn't part of Lionheart. Ye confirmed it and said he just collects trash and doesn't usually rescue it. Ye begins unleashing his power, saying that when it comes to trash like Qingshan, he doesn't even want to bother collecting him. The passage that had been sealed now starts to open, and the protagonist moves toward it. The doctor runs after him, warning that the place has become a confusing labyrinth, and if Ye happens to take the same path he came from, he will certainly encounter an absorption, and they could end up getting lost. Still, he offers to help, saying he can guide the protagonist through the abyss so they can find his sister together and return safely. Ye keeps walking in silence. Qingshan steps in front of him and says he'll take that silence as agreement, urging him to follow since that's the path he had taken. The doctor leads the way through the first portal with Ye right behind. Qingshan asks what group Ye belongs to. The protagonist replies that he works alone. The doctor is shocked, questioning who would work alone in such times, since anyone capable is quickly recruited by major groups like Tartarus, Lionheart, or Cloud Top. He explains those groups pay hunters very high salaries and then suggests that once they get out, he could introduce Ye to some of them as a reward for his help. The protagonist grows irritated, glares at him, and says his sister's name is Ye Xiaoju. If he really wants to guide and help, then he should shut up and do it silently. Upon hearing that name, Qingshan becomes desperate. He recalls a past conversation where he had asked about the condition of those two test subjects since, according to the documentation, both were underage. A man laughed and told the doctor not to worry because those girls' families had no means. One of them was Ye Xiaozhou, who lived with her older brother. The man explained her brother was a mercenary who risked his life in the abyss to make money, and sooner or later he would die there. The other was Lin Shugu, whose father had just gotten out of prison and survived on scraps. The doctor stared at the man and asked how he had convinced them. The man responded mockingly, asking if he really thought persuasion was needed. He had only asked if they wanted to be a burden to their families. He told Lin Shugu that her father was unemployed, struggling to afford her treatment, and had been visiting her less often. Maybe she was already a burden to him. Then he pointed at Ye Xiaoju, saying he told her to think about how her brother constantly risked his life to pay for her treatment, and asked if she didn't want him to be safe. Ye Xiaozhou immediately said yes. Seeing their interest, the man laughed and said there might be a new treatment that could cure them both and prevent them from being a burden, asking if they wanted to participate. Lin Shugu asked to go first. Ye Xiaozhou also raised her hand, saying she would love to be able to stand on her own and no longer be a burden to her brother. The man placed 2 papers on the table, praising them as good children and telling them the agreement was right there. Just sign. Inside the lab, the man and the doctor watched the experiments, and the man commented on how easy it was to deceive people like that. Qingshan said that what was truly amazing wasn't the trick, but that even this kind of trash could hold value for humanity. The man praised the doctor, calling him the best director, and saying the research could help job changers push past their limits to become stronger, making his contribution to society extraordinary. Qingshan grew excited, agreeing and declaring that each subject could be sold for billions, a great contribution indeed. One of the other doctors in the room asked if they could start the experiments. The chief doctor gave the order to proceed. A physician injected a syringe into the patient's blood bag, announcing her as experiment number 1. But immediately her body began bleeding and decomposing inside the chamber. Everyone was shocked, and Qingshan demanded to know what was happening. A woman involved in the project explained that the abyssal cells were rejecting the host, with no energy variations coming from that incompetent vessel, so the abyssal stem cell injection had failed. Qingshan looked at the grotesque sight and dismissed it as just a corpse, saying it didn't matter. They still had one more chance. Suddenly, the woman says there's a big problem because someone is causing trouble. Qingshan asks who it is, and she points to the screen, saying it's the father of the girl they just tested. Qingshan becomes irritated and orders that the man be brought in. The doctor's accomplice says he will fetch him personally. By the time he arrives, the guards have already restrained the man. He demands to know what they're doing, saying they can't beat a patient inside the hospital, and stresses that the director ordered the man to be brought in. On the way, the father starts smiling, saying his daughter is with the director. When they reach the experiment room, Qingshan introduces himself and says he's the director of that hospital and that the man's daughter is right there. The father looks around in confusion and asks where his daughter is. The director points at the tank and says she's inside. He explains that unfortunately she agreed to it, but there were complications. Qingshan says he's sorry, that it's truly a pity, but they will compensate him as outlined in the contract his daughter signed. Seeing this with his own eyes, the man is shocked and begins to cry. The director tells him that he won't even be allowed to keep what remains of his daughter's body because the hospital needs it for research. The father loses control, punches Qingshan in the face, calls him a worm, and screams at him to give his daughter back immediately, asking why such a horrible experiment would be allowed and where their humanity is. The director yells that the girl was nothing but a cripple who couldn't even use her own body, and that in this way she contributed more to society. He adds that the compensation is more than enough, so the father should be grateful for what his daughter did, take the money, and disappear. The father continues sobbing desperately, screaming that his daughter was just a child and letting her sign that contract was the same as committing murder. He insists he doesn't want money. He wants his daughter alive and well. Qingshan says the man is just insolent and orders the guards to take him away. As he is dragged out, the father shouts that he will send everyone there to hell, throw them all into the abyss, and make sure no one escapes. Qingshan then turns and asks how Ye Xiaoju's experiment is going. A man says no energy has been detected yet and that more detailed observation is needed, but then asks whether that girl's brother might also put on a show. Qingshan keeps sneering, saying that even if he did, it would only be a little performance because he's nothing more than a garbage collector. Back in the present, the protagonist notices that the moment he mentioned his sister's name, the doctor went silent, so he asks if by chance they know each other. Qingshan tries to distance himself, laughing nervously and saying he's never heard of that name and maybe she's behind the next door. Trembling with fear, he wonders if this man wasn't supposed to be just a trash collector. So why does he seem so strong? He even questions if he had been hallucinating when he saw him defeat the beast in the previous room. Qingshan grows more desperate, realizing that if the man is really strong, this time he's as good as dead. Maybe if he throws the girl into the monster's pit and escapes alone, he might still survive. As they continue walking, Qingshan starts glancing nervously around. Ye asks what's wrong and if the doctor forgot the way. Qingshan says no and tries to cover it up, claiming he's just worried about his sister since there were many monsters in the hospital ward earlier and he had no choice but to run. Ye stays silent and notices something ahead. The director keeps crying, shaking with fear, convinced he'll be killed if the protagonist finds out his sister is dead. Still, maybe he can blame the abyssal monsters and avoid full responsibility. Suddenly, the thing the protagonist was watching makes a noise. Instantly, he realizes what it is and yanks the doctor by the collar, pulling him out of the path of an attack. He points out that this time, it isn't a monster. Qingshan is still trembling, clueless about what just happened. Ming appears, apologizing, saying he thought they were a monster. He looks at the doctor and asks if he's Director Qingshan, explaining that he received a commission from Lionheart to rescue him. The protagonist puts it together and says that apparently Ming really is there to save the doctor. But Qingshan, still in shock, screams at Ming, demanding to know if he's really there to save him, since he almost just killed him. Ye begins to say that he should have realized it sooner, since that same sword had left marks near the entrance of the labyrinth, and even if a whole team had been wiped out, it doesn't surprise him that someone as strong as Ming could have handled everything alone. Ming steps forward, introduces himself, and says he is a double mercenary. For the right price, the lives of his companions mean nothing. The protagonist watches and thinks he's seen deranged double mercenaries before. Men who risk their lives in the abyss for higher pay, sometimes claiming the entire reward if their team dies. The doctor explains that he is the one who needs to be saved here, asking Ming to take him. Ye grabs the doctor and insists that he doesn't believe this man is here to rescue anyone, since his sword is radiating murderous intent. Qingshan argues that he doesn't feel anything, but the protagonist cuts him off and tells Ming he isn't there to sabotage anyone's mission. However, the director asked him to throw them off track, since his sister was in a room right behind the mercenary. Ming draws his sword and turns, saying he actually did see a little girl earlier. Hearing this, the protagonist is shocked and asks if he's telling the truth and where that girl is. The director grows more terrified, thinking that if she's alive, he's doomed. Ming tosses a teddy bear to Ye. The protagonist stares at the object, panicked, and demands to know where the mercenary got it. Ming closes his eyes and says the girl truly was adorable, but sadly, she didn't survive. At that moment, Ye feels his soul collapse and asks what Ming just said. The director, somewhat relieved, thinks that if the girl is dead, then he's safe after all. The mercenary explains that he had warned the girl he wouldn't intervene if a monster attacked her, and that whether she lived or died didn't matter to him. Still, he had promised her he would deliver a message if he ever met her brother. As Ye listens, he begins trembling. Ming continues, saying the girl told him she wished she could have waited at the hospital door for her brother, to show him she was fine, so he wouldn't risk his life trying to save her. Ye loses control, consumed by rage, and charges forward, demanding why Ming stood still even knowing she was in danger. Ming replies that a mercenary's mission is only to complete the task and take the payment. Anything beyond that isn't his concern. Preparing for battle, he adds that the curse he carries ensures all who follow him will die, and each time he alone survives. So, in a way, it was still her own fault. Ming defends and counterattacks, but Ye keeps pressing, screaming and demanding to know where his sister is. The mercenary holds his ground and says if Ye hands over the director, he'll show him the way. The protagonist asks what happens if he refuses. The director interjects that he's still standing there, hearing everything. Ming answers coldly that if Ye refuses, he'll show no mercy to anyone and send them all to hell, even comrades he once fought beside. He launches another strike, but Ye dodges and finds an opening, disarming his opponent. He rushes in, demanding what Ming can do now that he has no weapon. Ming simply studies Ye's movements and manages to grab both his hands at once. He activates a skill called Disarm, which disables any weapon for 8 seconds, then headbutts Ye and throws him back. Ye steadies himself to continue fighting and admits that, for a moment, he thought the mercenary only knew how to use that weapon. But this was unexpected. Ming explains that double mercenaries, in dangerous situations, are always the first to be used as human sacrifices, even against unknown monsters. As a result, they must learn to use their bodies as weapons when needed. He adds that he hasn't even used half his strength yet. Picking up his sword again, he points it at Ye and declares that now he doesn't stand the slightest chance of winning. Ming prepares to attack once more with the emerald blade. Ye watches the weapon and thinks that although the sword is extremely powerful, its size and weight make it slow. and as long as the target moves before the strike is completed, it can be avoided. Ming continues his assault, but the protagonist manages to dodge, though only with great difficulty. Ye realizes his opponent is truly fast and, without hesitation, summons his creatures. Ming is caught off guard when Ye's spiders manage to entangle him, but with sheer brute strength, he rips through the webs and charges the creatures, declaring that Ye will never succeed if he relies on them to defeat him. Ming unleashes his rock-shattering strike, tearing up the ground in front of him, and says that if the protagonist really thinks he can defeat him with such tricks, he is completely mistaken. But Ye suddenly appears behind him, surging forward like a missile. Ming notices at the last moment and turns, blocking the punch with his sword. The impact is so strong that it sends him flying. Looking at Ye, he admits that if it weren't for the weight of his sword, which managed to absorb the force of that blow, he would probably be in pieces. Seeing the aura emanating from Ye's body, Ming says he's beginning to think Ye isn't one of those level 0 incompetents. The two lock eyes, and Ming comments that the protagonist's strength likely goes far beyond what he's shown. Ye retorts that his combat skills aren't far behind the mercenaries and, growing angrier, says he'll only ask one more time where his sister is. Ming remembers being with Ye Xiaoju, who once said her brother was very strong, and he asked her who was stronger, him or her brother. Ming had been confused, asking who her brother was. Ye Xiaoju had explained that she had the best brother in the world. Even though he was just a collector, he strove every day to become stronger. She admired him deeply and hoped one day to be like him. Ming had looked at her and asked if she really believed her brother was strong, since from what he knew, collectors were usually level 1 or low-class jobs and had nothing to do with real strength. But she had refused to believe it, shouting that he was lying. She explained that whenever she saw her brother's determined eyes and his muscular arms, she knew he was a true warrior. Ming had grown curious, wondering what kind of person her brother really was, and she had said that when the time came, she would introduce them. Back in the present, the mercenary looks at Ye and says that the look in his eyes now belongs to someone who has faced countless life-and-death situations, and that, from the way he fights, he must be using his last potion at the height of the battle. Ming studies him carefully, thinking he can see Ye's basic attributes, his health bar, and that he is categorized as a double swordsman. However, his HP isn't very high if Ming stacks his berserker bonus damage and lands a critical strike on a weak point. He could probably kill Ye in just 3 blows. But even as he assesses this, he realizes Ye is different from the other class changers he's fought before. Ye wears no armor, and besides the sword in his hands, carries nothing else. The mercenary lunges with full force. Ye focuses entirely on his offense, leaving no room for defense, because that seems to be his fighting style, full-body assault. Ming goes for the first strike, but Ye dodges and with a swift movement slips behind him. But that's exactly what Ming wanted from the start. He whirls around with his berserker mode active, laughing as he prepares to strike. Ye realizes it and thinks that Ming truly reacts fast, but he activates his soul impulse skill. With this burst of speed, he counters before Ming's strike lands, moving faster than before. Ye lands a critical hit, then another lucky critical, and even inflicts a grievous wound. He notices, however, that Ming isn't dodging, as if he doesn't care about being hit, which is strange. Ming quickly turns and the wound on his neck heals instantly. Ye is stunned, wondering what's happening. Ming charges again with everything he's got, but Ye counters with his collector's skill. Even so, Ming, still in berserker mode, grabs one of Ye's hands and channels all his strength with the other, catching him off guard. He slams Ye into his own skill, causing a massive explosion at the site. Ye emerges unscathed. The mercenary explains that his trait prevents him from dying to ordinary attacks. Ye asks if he's immortal, and Ming replies that the abyss is full of existences beyond current human comprehension. Professions, skills, attributes, equipment, curses, even unique divine punishments that one must endure in pursuit of power. For even with the fear of death, people cannot resist the temptation of walking the line between life and death, reaching for treasures that were never theirs, and then claiming them as their own, refusing to leave them for anyone else. That's when the gods notice them, perhaps out of amusement or simply to erase that person's future altogether. Ming starts laughing and says that even so, he can still obtain the power he desires. His body begins to decompose in a strange way, and he adds that no one warned this person that along with eternity they would also strip away all their most precious possessions. Ye grows confused and says maybe he isn't immortal after all, but rather undead. The doctor confirms that the rumors about abyssal monsters transferring their abilities to those who change professions are true, since the undead trait is a powerful characteristic that allows endless regeneration, as long as energy isn't depleted. Ming keeps decomposing and then suddenly reappears out of nowhere, saying that just before death he reached out to eternity and came back to life. When that happened, people would say he returned alone once again, and by all appearances he was cursed with bad luck, for he always came back from missions alone. Though there was no proof, as a double-sword mercenary, if all his companions died, he got to keep the entire commission for himself. It was hard not to suspect him of being a team killer. From then on, people started avoiding him, saying that if he was going on a mission, they wouldn't, because they didn't feel like dying that day. Ming says that's the price he paid for eternity. He died, but even so, he goes on living forever. He glares at the protagonist and charges again, activating his killing intent skill. It triggers when his life drops below 33%, doubling both his vulnerability to damage and his own damage output. Ye is shocked and even worried at this new ability, thinking that combining it with his curse is absurdly overpowered. But he too activates his Blood Nightmare skill and his body turns into nothing but an illusion of blood. He manages to dodge the strike and braces for battle. The mercenary keeps pressing forward, unafraid of injury or even death, while the protagonist defends, wondering if there's really no way to defeat this monstrosity. Ming declares that when it comes to strength, his victory is the only logical conclusion. Ye then uses the divine artifact he had acquired earlier and a Reaper appears. Ming looks at the summoning and guesses it's probably a green-class glass artifact. He tries to strike the apparition, but nothing happens, and the Reaper lands a direct hit on him. From this, Ming deduces it isn't a physical weapon, but purely the effect of a skill. The protagonist explains that whenever any target dies from that ability, it triggers the Despair Harvest trait. Moreover, life and mana slowly regenerate thanks to Despair Harvest, and because the mercenary's body is already dead, the ability activates with every successful strike. And the reason the undead can live forever is because of their mana. In other words, for someone like Ming, who has become undead, the health bar is nothing but decoration. His true vitality is his mana, which cannot be detected. The mercenary says Ye has finally figured it out, and he's not as stupid as Ming thought. Ye replies that the abyss is full of rules, and even puzzles that seem impossible have their answers. A mighty warrior can still be a clumsy brute, a glass cannon can deal massive damage but die easily, and a body that seems invincible can still have a weakness outside itself. The protagonist points out that Ming doesn't wear armor and that with his self-sacrificial attack style, he tricks enemies into thinking they can trade blows with him, when in truth, hand-to-hand combat isn't a path to victory. It's a flaw he shows on purpose. Ming admits this is true, saying that survival in the abyss means knowing how to bend the rules to your favor. But he warns that even Ye must have some fatal flaws. Ye asks what he means, and Ming explains that among strength, agility, intelligence, constitution, willpower, and luck, one of those 6 attributes is likely his weak point. Ye apologizes and says he's different. He has many extra points, which he distributes evenly at each level, making his class the hexagonal warrior. This time, the one who attacks first is the protagonist, knowing he has to strike before Ming's wounds regenerate if he wants to end the battle quickly. Ming blocks, but he realizes Ye's strength, speed, and reaction time are all far beyond the norm for warriors his age. Clearly, the protagonist isn't holding back. Ye dodges the counterattack with ease and says that peculiar techniques, brute powers, or even those useless talents people often ignore, he has mastered them all. He dodges another strike and counters with a direct blow to Ming's back. Pulling away, he explains that physical attacks alone may not be able to kill Ming, but the continuous drain of mana will slow his regeneration. And eventually, when the mana runs out, he will die. Slower than before, Ming tries to continue attacking, but Ye uses his skill again and destroys the mercenary's arm. Ming stares at the ruined limb and asks Ye if his mana consumption has already failed. Ye answers that, either way, he still has the advantage. Ming then repeats Ye's own words back to him, saying that just as he himself had claimed, even the most impossible puzzles have a solution, and perhaps Ye's weakness doesn't lie in combat, but somewhere outside of it. Ye glances back and sees his sister's teddy bear lying on the ground. He wonders when it fell. Seizing on the moment, Ye lowers his guard, Ming lunges forward, slams the protagonist's head into the ground, and says he shows no sympathy to anyone trying to stop him, even former teammates. He'll send them to hell without hesitation. Yet he adds that Ye is different from everyone else, because he still carries the morals of the living. Even knowing the person he's trying to protect is worthless trash, he still fights to protect them. Ming then asks how Ye would choose between the life of his sister and the director. Hearing this, Ye's eyes widen as he seizes on the word choose. That means his sister isn't dead. Ming releases him and asks when exactly he ever said she was. The teddy bear, he explains, was only a symbol to convince Ye he knew where she was. Laughing, he walks off, saying that girl isn't easy to kill, just like her brother. Ye, still confused, demands to know what Ming really means by that. Hours earlier, in another room, the sound of battle rang out. The mercenary fought one of the abyssal monsters, while 2 others held Ye Xiaozhou in their grasp. She cried, thinking she would never see her brother again. She remembered the mercenary telling her that if a monster attacked, he wouldn't help. Since she hadn't hired him, her life meant nothing to him. She also remembered her brother's joyful words, telling her he had found a well-paying job that would be enough to heal her legs, and that all she had to do was wait so she could stand again. With the tears in her eyes, she thought about not wanting to keep being a burden, not even to her own brother. Accepting death, she began to say goodbye, apologizing, but the will to live surged through her body. She begged the heavens to make her strong, even if only for a moment. Whispering please over and over, she opened her eyes and a strange energy overtook her. The monsters recoiled in fear at what appeared before them. She had awakened a new skill, Metamorphosis Master. She transformed into her teddy bear, only massive and monstrous. With a single strike, she could crush monsters as if they were nothing. While the mercenary struggled against the leader, he suddenly noticed the severed head of a monster land beside him. Turning, he saw that Ye Xiaozhou had also transformed into a beast. He muttered that those treated with abyssal cells often had a higher chance of awakening abilities, and that she must be one of those victims, just as another father had once said. Even as a monster, she continued crying and reached her hand out to him. He stayed on guard, fearing she might attack. After all, he had heard that those touched by the temptation of abyssal cells often lost their minds and became raging monsters. But Ye Xiaozhou spoke even in her monstrous form, asking what had happened, because she felt much taller than before and, more importantly, she could walk. She found it strange. Ming, shocked, asked if she truly hadn't gone insane and demanded to know her name. Sitting down beside him, still weeping, she said her name was Ye Xiaozhou. Relieved, he said she really was still herself. He led her to a reflective surface, and when she saw herself, she grew furious, crying out that she had turned into a giant teddy bear. The mercenary says he doesn't know whether to congratulate her or not for what happened. Ye Xiaozhou grows more desperate, screaming that she no longer looks human, feeling deeply ashamed at the thought of facing her brother in that form, and asking how she can return to normal and what she should do. Ming replies that she's starting to get really annoying and explains that the ability is hers, so there's no way he could know how she can transform or change back. He turns away and says it's fine if she doesn't want to keep traveling with him. Either way, he'll continue his mission and try to find that person. She hands him the teddy bear and asks that if he can deliver it to her brother, she would be very grateful. She also begs him to tell her brother that she might need some time to prepare herself mentally since she has never been as shocked as she is now. The mercenary takes the teddy bear and says that if he happens to meet her brother, he'll tell him that personally. Back in the present, the mercenary says that if they continue fighting, he would probably still have the advantage, but he would like to see the protagonist's true abilities. Still, they have no real reason to interfere in each other's path. The director suddenly asks if Ye Xiaozhou really isn't dead. The protagonist is still stunned by the doctor's unusual interest in his sister. Ming takes a deep breath and says that specifically, the doctor standing behind Ye is the one responsible for the dangerous situation his sister is in right now, because it was thanks to him that the abyss appeared. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new content. Thank you.